I used to think that the national forests were the last untouched sanctuaries in America. Silent, vast, breathing ancient air. When I first started RV camping solo, I romanticized the idea of disappearing into those woods. Not forever, but just long enough to find silence, peace, clarity. What I didn't expect was how easy it actually is to vanish, and how sometimes nature isn't what makes you disappear. It was late September when I set out, the kind of crisp, transitional weather that makes you want to keep driving. I was heading into the Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia. I'd heard stories of bear sightings, old Cherokee land, strange caves, exactly the kind of place I like to explore with my vintage Volkswagen Westphalia. No cell service, no neighbors, just me, the trees, and the open road. I'm 34, divorced, no kids, and maybe a little too comfortable being alone. There's a part of me that chases solitude like other people chase adrenaline, but there's another part, quieter, deeper, that maybe wanted to test something. Maybe I wanted to see what would happen if I stayed alone long enough. If the forest would speak to me. I arrived at a primitive campsite just after sunset, one of those unofficial spots tucked off an old logging road, marked only by a stone fire ring and decades of pine needles. I'd found it on an old RV forum. Someone posted GPS coordinates with a cryptic caption, "Quiet, but you'll feel watched." That should have been enough to keep me away, but of course it wasn't. I parked the van, turned off the headlights, and stepped into a silence so thick it felt like stepping underwater. No crickets, no wind, just the slow creaking of branches somewhere above. The stillness was so complete it made me feel like I'd interrupted something, like the forest had just been in conversation, and I'd barged in without knocking. I set up quickly, more from instinct than excitement, lit a small fire, cooked up some lentils and rice, cracked open a local beer, tried to enjoy the solitude. But I kept looking over my shoulder. The trees felt too close, the space too still, like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the absence of highway noise, just my brain adjusting to the natural quiet. By the time I climbed into the van to sleep, the fire had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows that reached too far into the woods. I locked the doors, not something I always do, but that night it felt necessary. I slid into my sleeping bag, turned off the lights, and waited for my thoughts to slow down. That's when I heard the first knock. 3 soft taps against the rear of the van. Not loud, not hurried, just deliberate, like someone politely asking to come in. I froze. My brain raced to make sense of it. Animal, tree branch, acorn, but no, it was too rhythmic, too human. I stayed perfectly still, listening, nothing. I waited a full minute, then slowly unzipped my sleeping bag and inched toward the back window. I lifted the curtain with the tip of my finger. Darkness. Just the dim outline of trees, nothing moving, no footsteps, no sound. I told myself it was probably a raccoon, maybe even a deer brushing against the van. I laid back down, heart still thudding, and forced my eyes closed. At some point I must have fallen asleep. But the dreams I had that night were strange, fragmented. I saw the forest, but not the one I was camped in. It was older, wilder, full of white trees that stretched endlessly in every direction, their bark smooth and pale like bone. I was running, barefoot, breathless. Something behind me. Something I couldn't see but could feel, like gravity pulling in reverse. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat. The van was cold, the sun just beginning to rise. I sat up and wiped my face, still haunted by the dream. But what really unsettled me wasn't the memory of running. It was the footprint, a single bare footprint in the dew on my windshield. Not mine. Too small, too narrow, like a child's. But it was pressed into the glass from the outside. I jumped out, scanned the ground around the van. No other prints, just that one. No broken branches, no sign of anyone or anything. My mind tried to piece it together. Maybe a leftover mark from earlier. Maybe I leaned against the glass and forgot. But no. I knew every inch of that van, and that print hadn't been there last night. I didn't stay long that morning. Packed up fast, didn't eat, didn't even make coffee. Something about the silence had changed. It felt aware, like The forest had shifted in the night, and now it knew I was there. As I drove out, the logging road seemed longer than I remembered. The turns didn't feel familiar. Trees pressed in closer. More than once I had to stop and back up to maneuver around fallen logs that I didn't remember being there. I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing in the road behind me. When I finally reached the gravel trail that led back to the main road, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I told myself I was overreacting, that camping alone can mess with your head. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in me. Some quiet part of myself had heard something in that silence, and it wasn't finished speaking. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I headed west, deeper into the mountains, chasing some invisible thread that tugged at my chest. Something about leaving right then, just driving back to the familiar, felt wrong. Like whatever I'd stumbled into hadn't let go of me yet. I wasn't ready to pretend it hadn't happened. So I drove until the road narrowed again, until it stopped pretending to be civilized. Eventually, I found another site, a small Forest Service campground near Suches, Georgia. More maintained, a few designated spots with picnic tables and fire rings. Still no one else around. Midweek in late September, people don't come out here unless they're looking for something. I parked by a creek, shaded by tall oaks and maples already bleeding red and orange at the edges. It was beautiful, almost enough to settle my nerves. But when I stepped out of the van, I noticed something subtle, something that sent a chill up my spine. The smell. It wasn't strong. Not yet. But it was there, just beneath the usual scent of leaves and soil. Sweet, almost metallic, like blood and flowers, and it was coming from upstream. I stood there for a minute, trying to ignore it, rationalize it, but the air felt thick in my lungs, like I was breathing something I shouldn't. Still, I told myself I needed rest. I needed to reset. I'd let one strange night unravel my sense of safety, and I wasn't about to let paranoia dictate my route. That evening, I made dinner, sat at the picnic table, tried to read. I even managed to laugh at myself a little, thinking how easy it is to let fear write your story when you're alone. But when the sun dipped below the trees, that feeling came back. The stillness. Not peaceful, predatory, like something out there was waiting for darkness. I didn't light a fire that night. I didn't want to draw attention. I got in the van early, locked the doors, and left the curtains open just enough to see out. I figured if anything moved in the trees, I'd catch it. But the night passed quietly. No knocks, no dreams. It wasn't until morning that things got worse. I stepped out of the van just after dawn and immediately noticed the smell was stronger. It clung to my skin, sour and sweet all at once. I walked up the creek a little ways, boots crunching soft under damp leaves, and that's when I found the second footprint. Not in dew this time. This one was in the mud, right by the edge of the water. Small, bare, and beside it, half buried in the silt, was a piece of fabric. Faded blue, looked like the corner of a child's shirt. It was soaked through and torn at the edge as if snagged on something. I picked it up with 2 fingers. It was stiff, like it had been in the water too long. Something snapped in me then. A quiet fear that had been building suddenly caught fire, because this wasn't just some weird trick of the woods. This was evidence. This was real. I carried the fabric back to the van and stared at it for a long time, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. No cell service, no ranger station for miles. And if I reported it, what would I even say? That I'd found one muddy footprint and a torn piece of cloth? It wasn't enough. Not yet. So I decided to investigate. I packed a day bag with snacks, water, a knife, flashlight, left a note in the van with the date, time, and the direction I was heading, just in case. The trail was faint, more of an animal path, winding alongside the creek through thick underbrush. I followed it upstream past fallen trees and mossy boulders until I reached a small clearing maybe half a mile in. That's where the smell hit hardest. It was stronger now, undeniable. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped into the open space and froze. In the middle of the clearing stood a wooden post, weathered and gray like an old fence beam. Lashed to it, hanging like some kind of offering, was another scrap of fabric, red this time. and beneath it, arranged in a perfect circle, were small bones. Animal, maybe, but clean. Picked dry. Too clean. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My ears strained for sound. Anything. But the woods had gone deathly quiet again, like they were holding back something they didn't want me to hear. I turned and walked back. Fast. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled the whole way, like I was being followed, but every time I looked back, there was nothing. When I got back to the van, I tore the note off the dashboard and stuffed it in my bag. I sat there behind the wheel, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they started to ache. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't supposed to have seen that clearing. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't just random. It wasn't just weird. It was meant to be found, or maybe meant for someone else. And I'd wandered into it. By then it was past noon, and the clouds had rolled in, thick, heavy. The air felt electric, like a storm was gathering. I didn't want to sleep there again. I wasn't sure I'd wake up if I did. So I packed up and started driving again. No real direction. Just out. But that's the thing about national forests. They don't let go so easily. Roads twist in on themselves. Paths repeat. I must have taken a wrong turn because after an hour of driving, I passed a tree that had the exact same carving I'd seen on my way in. A spiral etched deep into the bark. A single long coil with no end. And when I stopped the van to check the map, old-fashioned paper since there was no GPS, I realized something chilling. The spiral was a trail marker. I flipped through the legend. There was no spiral listed. I stared at the map like it might somehow change if I just looked long enough. But the legend stayed the same. Squares for trailheads, dots for campsites, triangles for overlooks. No spirals, no coils, no symbols that matched what I'd seen carved into that tree. Which meant one of two things. Either the spiral wasn't official or the map I had was missing something. Maybe both. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me already understood. That symbol wasn't for hikers. It wasn't for navigation. It was for them. Whoever had left the bones and fabric in that clearing. Whoever was marking a path through the forest that didn't belong on paper. I started the van again, but I drove slower this time, watching the trees. About 20 minutes later, I saw another one. The same spiral, this time burned into the trunk with something black and sticky seeping from it. Not sap, something wrong, and this tree was facing the road, staring at it like an eye. That's when I realized I wasn't just on a wrong turn. I was being guided, not by signs or GPS, by something older, by whatever had etched those spirals, left those bones whispered in the night just outside my dreams. The forest didn't want me to leave. I pressed the gas hard. No more curiosity. No more trying to make sense of it. I just wanted out. But the forest changed around me. The light shifted, and even though I kept the van aimed west, the sky kept darkening too fast. It was only 2 p.m., but it felt like dusk had settled in. Shadows stretched long and thin across the narrow road. The trees leaned in tighter. The van rumbled over uneven gravel and potholes, and I started to worry I'd snap an axle if I didn't slow down. And that's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 50 feet ahead, a woman, pale, thin, wearing a blue flannel shirt that looked like it had been soaked in rain and never dried. Her hair hung in wet ropes over her face. She didn't wave, didn't move. I slammed on the brakes. For a second, I just stared at her through the windshield. Waiting, hoping maybe she'd speak. Ask for help. Do anything human. But she just stood there like she wasn't real. Like she'd always been there and I was the one trespassing. I leaned out the window. Hey, you okay? My voice cracked from the dryness in my throat. No response. Not a flinch. Something told me not to get out of the van. I don't know what it was. Instinct, gut, maybe just the memory of the bones. But I listened. I rolled the window back up, shifted into reverse, and started backing away. That's when she stepped forward. Not a lot, just one step. But it was enough. Because when her foot hit the dirt, the shadows behind her moved, shapes, dozens of them, unfolding from the brush, long-limbed, hunched, human-shaped, but not quite. like the outline of people seen through smoke, silent, watching. I threw the van into drive and floored it. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, and the van lurched forward. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to know if they were following. I just drove, heart hammering, the road winding and narrow and endless. When I finally hit pavement again, real pavement with faded lane markers and a wooden sign for a public access point, I almost wept. I pulled over at the next turnout and sat in the van, gasping, shaking. I checked my phone. 1 bar of signal. Enough. I called the ranger station, told them everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the shadows, the symbols, the woman in the woods. I just said I'd found a footprint and some cloth and a strange clearing with bones. They promised to send someone to investigate. Told me to come by the ranger office if I wanted to give a statement. I didn't. I drove straight out of the forest, down through the hills until I reached the outskirts of town. I found a motel, paid in cash, parked the van where I could see it through the window, and didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I bought a new map, spread it across the motel table, traced the route I'd taken, and that's when I noticed it. The place I'd camped, where I'd found the footprint, the bones, the clearing, it wasn't even marked. The road didn't go that far. As far as the map was concerned, that section of the forest didn't exist. I made a copy of the map, highlighted the route I remembered, circled the clearing in red ink, and then I left it behind in the motel room, tucked under the Gideon Bible in the nightstand drawer, because someone else would find it eventually, someone else would follow those spirals, but it wouldn't be me. Not again. I hit the road early, before sunrise. The motel's neon sign buzzed faintly in the dark, and the pavement was still slick with dew. I didn't even stop for coffee. I just wanted distance, miles between me and those woods. That stretch of national forest wasn't marked with any warnings, no caution signs or chained gates, but that didn't mean it was safe. Somewhere out there was a clearing that had no place on a map. Somewhere out there was a woman with wet hair and no face I could remember. And somewhere out there were those shadows. Watching. I drove south, past burned-out gas stations and long stretches of pine where the canopy thickened over the highway like a closing jaw. The further I got, the more I thought maybe I'd outrun it. The fear. The sense that something had seen me out there and hadn't let go. But fear like that, it doesn't just drain out of you. It changes your blood. It makes you hear things in static. It makes you look at tree lines differently. It was around Flagstaff when the dreams started. At first, I chalked it up to stress, long days on the road, lack of sleep. But these weren't just regular nightmares. They were locations. Places I'd never seen, but somehow knew intimately. And in every one, I was being watched from the trees. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, unsure of what I'd screamed in the middle of the night. One dream in particular kept coming back. A tent pitched on red dirt, no moon, only the silhouette of trees and the soft crackle of a fire that wouldn't stay lit. And always, footsteps circling just out of sight. Too slow to be a wild animal, too patient to be human. The worst part? I'd never owned a tent. But the scene felt familiar, like it had happened years ago, and I'd buried the memory too deep to retrieve. I stopped in Arizona for a few days, tried to ground myself, get back to why I started RV camping in the first place. To see the country, live in the quiet, wake up somewhere new every morning with no one to answer to. But the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt loaded. Every rustle in the brush felt deliberate. Every distant coyote howl turned into something else once it echoed through the valley. And sometimes, especially in the early morning fog, I'd swear I saw faint impressions in the dirt around my van, footprints that didn't match my shoes, long, narrow, and too far apart for a normal gait. It wasn't paranoia. Not anymore. Something was following me. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that all forests are weird, that we see patterns in chaos because our brains are wired to survive. But deep down, I wasn't surviving. I was retreating. One campsite to the next, always a little more tired, a little more guarded, windows shut tighter, knife closer to the bed. Then came the canyon. Somewhere near the Utah border, I pulled off onto a BLM road I'd found through a camping app. Secluded, free, unmarked. Just the kind of place I used to love before all this started. The air was dry, silent. Red rocks surrounding me like the ribs of something ancient and buried. I parked the van and took a short hike along the ridge, trying to breathe again, trying to feel normal. And that's when I saw it. Again. A spiral. Not carved into a tree this time, drawn into the dust with stones. A perfect coil, like a snail shell or a galaxy. Positioned right where two trails forked and disappeared over opposite ridges. My blood turned cold. I didn't touch it, didn't step over it. I just backed away, turned around, and walked briskly back to the van. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, the flashlight in my lap, scanning the hills until the stars gave way to a gray, brittle dawn. When I finally moved, I didn't even pack. I just drove. Let the dishes rattle in the sink, let my boots roll around the floor. I wanted pavement again, towns, people, something real. I passed a ranger station just outside of Bryce and pulled in. My hands were shaking and my throat felt like it had been scraped with sandpaper. I walked in and asked the woman at the desk if she knew anything about the spiral symbol. I kept my voice casual, like it was just a curiosity. A hiker's question. She hesitated. "I've seen it before," she said, slowly. "Usually up north, Utah, Colorado, Idaho. Some locals say it's just kids messing around." But she looked around the empty station, then leaned in. A few missing person reports over the years, people who went off trail. Their last GPS pings were near spots where that symbol turned up. She didn't smile, didn't joke. She just gave me a paper map of the stay on the main trails. I drove out of there knowing two things. First, this spiral wasn't random. It meant something, a boundary, a marker, a warning. Second, whatever I'd seen in those woods back in Oregon, whatever had started following me since, it wasn't tied to one forest. It was moving, and I was bringing it with me. I didn't stop for 3 days. From southern Utah through Nevada and into California, I pushed the van farther than I ever had. I'd sleep in short, scattered bursts at rest areas or gas stations, engines still running, my eyes darting to the side mirrors. I knew it wasn't rational, but what do you call fear that keeps matching your pace? By the time I hit the edge of the Sierra Nevada, I was running on fumes. Food was low. My hands trembled even when I wasn't holding the wheel. And worse, the spiral had made its way into my mind. Not just in dreams anymore, but in the way I mapped the roads. I kept turning onto smaller highways, back roads, forest roads, telling myself I was just avoiding traffic. But I wasn't. I was following something. Every stop felt like deja vu. Pine needles thick on the ground, moss clinging to trees in damp fists, a breeze that moved without sound, like a breath held too long. And always, just out of the corner of my eye, a sense that the forest was curling around me, like I'd taken a wrong turn into something alive. Somewhere outside Quincy, I stopped at a free campground called Boulder Flat. Just a few dirt clearings beside a creek and an old picnic table held together by rusted bolts. The place had a strange silence to it. No bird song, no insects, the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums like you're underwater. I should have kept driving, but I didn't. I told myself I needed rest. Just a few hours, a real meal, something warm. So I parked, locked the doors, and heated a can of chili on the propane stove. I ate in silence, staring into the tree line, heart never slowing down. And when night fell, I pulled the curtains tight and climbed into bed with my flashlight tucked under my arm. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a tapping sound, not loud, just persistent, like someone rapping on the back window with a fingernail. I stayed perfectly still, listening. My breath felt trapped in my throat. Tap, 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 then silence. Then crunching leaves, heavy, deliberate, circling. I reached for the flashlight, flicked it on, and pointed it toward the floor. I didn't dare shine it out the window. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to give whatever was out there the satisfaction of knowing I was awake. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. For a moment, there was nothing. And then 3 long knocks, right against the driver's side door. Knock, knock. I wanted to scream, to turn the key, floor the pedal, and blast down the road with gravel spraying behind me. But I didn't move, because somewhere in my gut I knew if I started the van, it would follow. If I drove off into the night, whatever was out there would ride the wind and find me again the next time I stopped. So I waited, motionless, cold sweat dripping into my eyes. My muscles seized so hard it felt like my spine might snap. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. No footsteps, no taps. Just the return of that unnatural, strangled silence. At dawn, I got out, slowly. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and pine rot. I walked around the van. No footprints, just one thing. Scratched into the dirt with something sharp was the spiral. Not made of rocks this time. Not carved. Just dragged. A wide, spiraling line that ended in a jagged, abrupt cut right beneath the center of my rear bumper, like something had finished drawing it and vanished. I left without cleaning it up. I didn't want my hands near it. That day I drove aimlessly, refusing to look at maps, apps, road signs. I kept thinking, what if it isn't the forests? What if it's me? What if I brought it with me when I left Oregon? And what if it never wanted to hurt me? What if it wanted me to understand? By the time I reached Shasta Trinity National Forest, I couldn't sleep anymore. I'd given up trying. I parked off the highway and just sat in the driver's seat for hours, staring at the horizon, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. Every place I'd stopped, every time I'd seen the spiral, they weren't just warnings. They were breadcrumbs. It was drawing me somewhere, luring me, or maybe leading me. I pulled out a paper map and started marking every spiral I'd encountered. From Oregon to Utah, Nevada to California, I traced the locations, red marker dragging over creased paper, heart pounding. It made a line, a curved one, like a path folding in on itself, like a spiral. And where did it lead? To the forest where it started. Back to that unmarked clearing outside Crescent, Oregon. Back to the place I told myself I'd never return. I crossed back into Oregon under a sky smeared with smoke-gray clouds. A slow drizzle had started near Klamath Falls, but as I crept closer to Crescent, it turned to fog. Dense, milky, clinging to the windshield no matter how hard the wipers scraped. It felt like the road was dissolving beneath me, like the map was unraveling. I don't know what I expected. Coming back. Closure, maybe. Answers. A final confrontation. But mostly, I just needed the spiral to stop. I reached the turnoff near the burn sign sometime after midnight. No markings, no mileposts, but I knew it instantly, like it had been carved into the muscle memory of my hands. I slowed the van, heart thrumming in my throat. It had been weeks since I first camped here, but the clearing looked exactly the same, undisturbed, untouched, like no time had passed at all, as if it had been waiting. I parked and cut the engine. The silence was immediate. No wind, no insects. Even the soft crackling of the forest seemed muted, like the trees were holding their breath. I stepped out. The cold wrapped around me like a wet sheet. The pine needles were slick beneath my boots. The scent of moss and old smoke hovered low to the ground. And then I saw it. Dead center in the clearing. The spiral. Etched into the dirt, but deeper this time. Dug in, almost like it had been clawed by something frantic. At its center, a blackened hole gaped open, maybe 2 feet wide, rough-edged, like a rotted tree stump, but with no bark, no roots. Just shadow. I should have run, but I knelt down beside it. I felt it before I heard it, a low thrum, faint vibrations under my fingertips, like the ground itself was humming, not mechanical, organic, rhythmic, and then a whisper. Not from the hole, not from the trees. From inside me. A voice that wasn't mine but used my memories, my pain, my fears. I stood up, stumbling back. The fog had thickened. I couldn't see the van anymore. Panic surged in my chest, but I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was tight, like I'd swallowed the silence. I backed away from the hole, hands shaking, and tried to orient myself, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The clearing had changed. The trees had shifted positions. No, that's not right. I had shifted. It wasn't just a place, it was a structure. The forest was shaped like the spiral, like a maze, and I was standing at its center. That's when I saw the others. Shapes, people. half faded, just barely visible through the fog, standing at the tree line in a perfect circle around me. No faces, just outlines. Human silhouettes, but wrong. Shoulders too long, necks tilted at unnatural angles, no movement, just watching. I blinked hard. They were closer. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out thought. I turned to run, but the spiral was gone. The hole was gone. The clearing itself was gone. I was surrounded by trees, thick, tight, smothering, like I'd never left the trail, like I'd never stepped into the clearing at all. Only one path was visible, a narrow trail leading into blackness. I followed it. What else could I do? Branches clawed at my coat. Roots tried to trip me. The deeper I went, the colder it got. A smell began to rise. Damp stone, blood, something burned. And that sound again. That hum, stronger now, echoing through the trees like a heartbeat. And then I stepped into a hollow space. Natural walls of stone, a ceiling of tangled limbs above me, and in the center, a ring of objects. Boots, tents, backpacks, all half buried in moss, some with names scrawled on them. J. Ortiz, L. Henley, T. Zhang. Names I didn't know, but some I did. A flashlight I'd seen in a missing persons report, a journal I'd read in an old blog post, pages still damp, full of spirals drawn in frantic loops. These were their things, the ones who disappeared. I turned around, breath shallow. The silhouettes were there again. Closer now, clearer, but still not moving. And then I heard her voice. You came back. I spun toward the sound. There, just behind a tree, her, Ray. Alive, pale, eyes wide, skin the color of wet ash, but it was her. She stepped forward and I nearly collapsed. You disappeared, I thought. I did, she said, voice flat, but it didn't take me. I followed it. I let it in. What is it? I asked. What does it want? Her eyes flicked toward the stone walls. It doesn't want. It shows. You think this place is haunted, but it's not. It's a mirror. It reflects the fear you carry into it. It draws a spiral because that's how you remember pain, around and around, no end, no escape. The fog coiled between us like breath from something massive just beyond sight. You never left, did you? I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I tried, but you came back, so it opened again. My knees buckled. I felt the forest close around me, the spiral pulsing under my feet. What do? I whispered. Her voice was soft. You stop running. You face it, before it follows you forever. I wanted to believe Ray was lying, that it was a trick of the woods or some hallucination conjured by lack of sleep and too many nights chasing ghosts across maps. But her eyes, her voice, they weren't illusions. They weren't stories. They were witness. And the way she stared at me, not with fear but pity, told me exactly what I didn't want to know. This place wasn't cursed. I was. Because I had brought my grief here, my guilt, my obsessions, and the spiral, it just echoed them back until I couldn't tell memory from madness. I stepped toward Ray, but she held out her hand like a warning. You have to do it alone. What? She nodded toward the ring of belongings, the boots, the backpacks, the things left behind. Everyone who disappeared, they didn't vanish. They let go, or they didn't. That's what decides what happens next. I shook my head, backing away. I didn't come here to die. Then stop feeding it, she said. Stop carrying it. But I don't know how. She stepped backward, vanishing into the tree line like she was never there at all. And I was alone again. The silence fell like a stone. I turned to the center of the hollow. The spiral had reappeared. But now it was burning. Not flames. Just heat, rising from the dirt, warping the air like a mirage. I saw the ash swirl upward, and with it, voices began to rise. Whispers layered over each other, hundreds, thousands, too many to make sense of, and all of them saying the same thing. Remember. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And so I walked forward, one step into the spiral. The moment my boot crossed that line, I felt it, like gravity shifted, like the air thickened. I couldn't hear the wind anymore. Couldn't feel my legs, only my heartbeat. And behind my eyes, images. I was 9, my older brother and I, lost in the bitter roots for 3 days after our dad got too drunk to find the van. That fear, that helplessness, it was still inside me. I saw my brother screaming for help, and I saw myself silent, pretending I wasn't scared, pretending it didn't hurt, carrying that silence for 20 years like armor. Step 2. I was 17, watching mom leave the house and never come back. They said it was depression, but I knew better. I'd seen her hands shake the week before. I'd read her notes. I hadn't said anything. I told myself I didn't know. I told myself it wasn't my fault. Step 3. I was 34, on the road full-time in the van, pretending this was a dream, telling my subscribers I loved it, telling myself it was freedom, when really it was escape. An attempt to outrun the weight that had started with my family and never let up. I fell to my knees. The spiral was on fire beneath me, the dirt glowing orange like hot coals, the voices now screaming but not in pain, in release. Let it go. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But what would be left if I did? That's when I saw the people again. The shadows, not at the edge of the forest this time, but walking the spiral too. Every face I'd read about, the missing, the lost, all of them looping the spiral in their own way. Not gone. Trapped between moments, between choices. It wasn't death that lived here. It was the refusal to decide. I stood up. My lungs felt like they'd been wrung dry. My skin burned from cold and heat at once. But I kept walking, the spiral pulling tighter with each step, until it wasn't a trail anymore, just a narrowing funnel of thought, memory, truth, and at the center, a mirror. Not made of glass, not even visible. But I felt it, like a pressure in my chest. It showed me something that split me open. Not what I feared, but what I believed about myself because of that fear. That I was weak, that I was broken, that I was a ghost walking through forests hoping the trees would make me feel real again. And in that moment, I finally said it out loud, I don't need to carry this anymore. The spiral stopped, not slowly, all at once. The fire dimmed, the whispers fell silent. The woods, for the first time in hours or maybe years, were still. I stepped forward, and I was standing the edge of my van. The clearing was quiet, normal. The spiral was gone. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, and Ray was nowhere to be found. Just the wind again. Just the trees. Just me. But I was breathing like someone who'd lived, not escaped, survived. I climbed into the van and turned the key. It caught on the first try. The road was waiting. The past was still behind me, sure. But now, I wasn't dragging it behind me like a shadow. Now it was just a story I'd lived through. I didn't drive fast. I didn't need to anymore. There was no panic in my chest, no need to outrun something unseen. The fear had done its job. It cracked something open in me, revealed what I was too stubborn, too proud, or too hurt to face. And now, that silence I used to fear, it wasn't chasing me anymore. It was riding with me. The road twisted through the trees like a vein through the earth. Veins I once feared I'd vanish into, just like the others. But now I knew, it's not the wilderness that steals us. It's what we bring into it. It's what we refuse to face until it swallows us whole. I passed the old forest boundary sign again. Faded wood, initials carved into the corner, just like before. But this time I noticed something different. My own initials were carved there too. I don't remember doing it. Maybe it was during the spiral. Maybe it was before, when I thought I was just exploring some trail for a story. Or maybe it was a reminder that I've been here longer than I thought, not in miles, but in memory. I pulled off at a scenic overlook a few miles out, not because I needed a break, but because for the first time in weeks, I wanted to sit with the world instead of run from it. The valley stretched below like something painted. Mist curling through the treetops, the sky bruised with early morning light. I sipped coffee from the cracked mug I never replaced. It tasted like smoke and rust and comfort. I thought about Ray. Was she real? Was any of it? Honestly, I don't care anymore. Some things are true whether they happened or not. And what she told me about how the spiral pulls at the people who carry too much pain, that stuck. It felt like it had always been inside me, just waiting to be said aloud. There's something ancient about these forests, not just in age, but in purpose. They don't speak in language. They speak in mirror, in echo, in tension, in dread. They pull at your seams until you either come apart or come clean. And I did. So if you're out there, if you're planning a trip, looking for a new place to park your RV, chasing that perfect sunrise in some forgotten corner of America, listen to me, please. Bring what you need, leave the rest. Don't come to these places hoping they'll fix you. They'll only reflect what you already are. And if you hear things in the woods, footsteps when you're alone, whispers when you're falling asleep, wind that doesn't quite sound like wind, don't panic. Don't assume it's something out to get you. Assume it's something trying to show you yourself. But you have to be brave enough to look. Not everyone makes it back from the spiral, and not because they vanish into thin air. Because they never make the choice. They never let go. That's what happened to the others. That's what almost happened to me. But not now. Now I keep moving. Not to escape, not to outrun anything, but because the road, the real road, starts when you stop pretending. I don't have all the answers, but I've got my hands on the wheel, and for the first time in a long time, that's enough. Story 2. I knew something was wrong the moment the wind stopped. We were parked 50 miles west of Kalispell, just shy of Glacier National Park, and the forest around us had been whispering all day. Branches creaked like distant doors, squirrels barked warnings from the pines, and something unseen crunched deep in the underbrush every few hours. But then, just as the sun slid behind the mountains and the cold started to seep in, the forest went dead. No wind, no birds, no crickets. It was like someone hit mute on the entire wilderness. I had done this before, RV camping across the American West. I knew how nature sounded when it was alive and when it wanted you gone. It was late September, the kind of time where autumn pretends to be winter in Montana. I was traveling with my cousin, Kyle, 32, a combat veteran who claimed he wasn't scared of anything. We had been close growing up, drifted apart during our 20s, and now, after both divorcing the same year, decided to reconnect on a guy's trip into the wild, a back-to-basics healing sort of thing. We picked Montana because it felt untouched, bigger than us, bigger than our problems. Glacier was the goal, but we took our time getting there, winding through old ranger roads and dead-end logging trails in my 1978 VW Riviera. She wasn't fast, but she was honest, and sometimes that's enough. That night, we camped in a clearing off a forgotten fire trail. No cell signal, no other humans, just us, the van, and that immense forest pressing in. Kyle had been tense since we crossed into Montana, and I chalked it up to old memories. He'd done a survival course out here before his first deployment, said it taught him how to listen to trees, how to feel when something in the woods had eyes. At first, I laughed it off, until that silence came. He looked up from the fire, eyes narrowed. Something's moving, big. I paused mid-beer, listened. Nothing. Probably a bear, I offered. You saw that claw mark on the trail sign earlier. Could be grizzlies nearby. No, he said. Bears make noise, sniffing, snorting, clumsy as hell in the brush. This is quiet. And he was right. Too quiet. We let the fire die out around midnight. Kyle insisted we sleep with the axe and the bear spray next to our cots. I slept in the van, he took the tent. We both locked our doors from the inside. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. Not Kyle's. Something else. Low. Ragged. Just outside the passenger side window. At first, I thought it was wind again, maybe the forest finally exhaling, but then it shifted. Paused, like it noticed me waking. I held my breath, eyes locked on the fogged-up window. And then, the faintest scrape. Nails. Fingers. Something brushing across the metal. I didn't move. Not for a full 5 minutes. And then I whispered Kyle into the dark. No answer. I cracked the door and slipped outside, barefoot, cold air biting at my chest. The tent was zipped shut, undisturbed. Kyle, I hissed. Still nothing. I unzipped the tent with the slowest fingers I could manage. Empty. The cot was flattened like something heavy had pressed into it. The axe was gone, but his boots were still there. That was the moment I felt it. The dread. Not fear. Not yet. Just that low rolling realization that something had changed. That I was now part of something I didn't understand. I scanned the tree line. Mist hung low, clinging to the brush. And in the middle of that mist, no more than 20 feet out, I saw it. A figure. Tall. Thin. Wrong. It didn't move like a person. It didn't move at all. Just stood there, legs angled slightly off, head cocked sideways like it was listening with everything but ears. I blinked. It vanished. Then the wind returned, a sudden gust that shook the trees hard enough to make them cry out. The forest was awake again. I backed into the van, locked the door, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until sunrise. No Kyle. I called for him the moment light touched the trees, searched the clearing, followed the trail back toward the river a half-mile away, found drag marks in the moss, not deep but clear, like someone pulling a sack. No blood, no prints. Just those long, unnatural smears heading deeper into the woods. By noon, I drove to the nearest ranger station, a 2-hour crawl over rutted trails and switchbacks. I told them Kyle wandered off, left out the part about the figure, about the breathing, about the way the forest held its breath that night. They found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no Kyle. Search and rescue gave up after 4 days. Said the bears probably got him, that it happens more than people think. Montana wilderness doesn't care about your story, but I do, and here's the thing that haunts me most. A week later, when I finally got the nerve to unpack the van, I found the axe. It was under my seat, still wet with something dark. I never heard Kyle scream, and now I can't stop hearing the forest breathe at night, even when I'm parked in flat Nebraska with nothing but cornfields for miles. Something in that wilderness doesn't want to be understood. It just wants to be fed. And if you ever find yourself off-grid in Montana, deep in those silent woods and everything suddenly goes quiet, don't wait. Get out. Because not everything out there walks on 2 legs, and not everything that disappears wants to be found. I didn't drive home right away. Something in me, something I still can't name, told me to stay in Montana a little longer. Maybe I thought Kyle would come stumbling out of the woods, scratched up, hungry, but alive. Maybe I needed closure. Or maybe I just couldn't live with the guilt of driving away while that forest still held him somewhere. I stayed at a small RV park outside Kalispell, the kind of place with a gravel loop and 6 or 7 pull-through sites, mostly seasonal rigs with wind chimes and cracked lawn chairs. The owners were old school, an older couple named Jim and Delia, who lived in a log cabin at the front of the property and ran the place off a clipboard and an old rotary phone. They didn't ask many questions when I rolled in looking like I hadn't slept in days, just pointed me to a site near the back and handed me a firewood bundle on the house. I thanked them. I didn't tell them why my cousin wasn't with me. I didn't tell them what I saw. That night, I kept the van locked. No tent, no fire. I just sat in the driver's seat staring out at the tree line behind the RV park, wondering how close the forest really was, wondering if it was waiting for me. Around 3 a.m., I heard the knock. 3 soft taps on the back window, not frantic, not threatening, just casual, like a friend who didn't want to wake you but needed to talk. I froze, I didn't turn around, didn't move, just listened. Silence. Then it came again. Tap, 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 this time on the side window closer to the door. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't dreaming, I hadn't slept at all. And here's the thing that still chills me. The knocking was low, not at standing height. This lower, maybe waist high. I cracked the curtain an inch and peeked. Nothing. Just my own breath fogging the glass. I waited until sunrise before I dared step outside. There were no footprints in the gravel, no scuff marks, no signs of anything moving in the night, but the back bumper had a smear of something across it. Mud, sap. I reached out to touch it, then paused. My fingers hovered there, trembling. It looked more like ash. I wiped it off with a towel and didn't say a word to the other campers. Later that morning, I went to the main office to pay for another night. Delia was there, folding laundry in front of the fireplace. "You all right, Han?" she asked, not looking up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost told her everything, but something held me back. Pride? Fear? That same stupid male instinct to bottle up every warning bell until it breaks inside your chest? I just said, "Did anyone else hear knocking last night?" She looked up slowly. "Knocking? Yeah, around 3. Could have been an animal or something, but it sounded like it was trying to get in. Delia stared at me a moment too long. Then she folded the towel and set it aside. 3rd time this month someone said that. My stomach dropped. Really? Usually when someone comes from the back country, down near Flathead, they pull in here, half-starved and jittery, say something, followed them out. That's always knocking. She glanced toward the door like she didn't want the walls to hear. You go camping alone out there? No, I said. I was with someone. She nodded once, slow. Was? I didn't answer. Delia walked over to a locked cabinet behind the counter and opened it. Inside was a worn, leather-bound guest book. She flipped through a few pages, then stopped and slid a Polaroid across the counter. Recognize him? It was Kyle, standing in front of the van, smiling, the forest behind him in perfect focus. My heart nearly stopped. Where did you get this? He came through here 6 years ago, she said. Alone, stayed one night, said he was doing recon for a future trip, mentioned his cousin had an old VW van you were fixing up together. I stared at the photo. He looked younger, but the look in his eyes was the same, that wary, alert tension he always carried after deployment. He said he was going to camp near the river, off trail. Delia continued, that he wasn't afraid of anything in those woods. I felt my throat tighten. What happened to him? I asked. Delia hesitated. He left in the middle of the night, didn't say goodbye, just gone. I turned the photo over. On the back in Kyle's handwriting was a note. If anything happens, don't go back, don't follow, don't listen to the trees. I sat in the van for hours after Delia handed me that photo. Kyle had been here before, 6 years ago, alone. That made no sense. He never told me, not once. We'd planned that trip together like it was our first time in Montana's wilderness, but clearly it wasn't for him. I couldn't shake the words on the back of that photo. Don't go back, don't follow, don't listen to the trees. I read it over and over again like it might rearrange itself into something more comforting. But it didn't. It just sat there in my hands like a quiet confession, like a warning, scratched out in the middle of the night by someone who knew the woods better than I ever could. I don't remember falling asleep, but at some point exhaustion knocked me out. I woke up to dusk bleeding through the RV curtains, my mouth dry, heart pounding from some dream I couldn't recall. The side door of the van was cracked open. Only by an inch or two, but open. I know I locked it. I always lock it. My breath caught. I didn't move, just listened. Somewhere outside, maybe 50 yards into the woods, I heard a voice. Faint. Male. Familiar. Hey, you awake? Kyle. It was his voice. I know it was. But it wasn't right. It sounded strained, like it had traveled too far, like the trees themselves were carrying it on their breath and pushing it through the leaves, bending the syllables just enough to set every hair on my body standing on end. Come on, man. I'm hurt. My stomach clenched. It said the right words. The same kind of thing Kyle would have said if he were really out there, limping through the dark, bleeding and desperate. But the tone was wrong. Too smooth, too calm. Like it was pretending to panic. I slid my hand to the flashlight beside my seat, switched it on, clicked it once against the dashboard, 3 short taps. Kyle and I had a code, always did. 3 taps meant, where are you? 2 taps back meant I'm close. Silence. The voice spoke again. Closer. You don't have to be afraid, just help me, I need you to come out here. It didn't ask where I was, didn't answer the taps, didn't say my name. That's when I knew. Whatever it wasn't Kyle. I slammed the door shut, locked every latch, pulled the curtains, and crawled into the sleeping compartment with the flashlight in my hands and my back pressed to the cabinets. Outside, twigs snapped. It was circling the van. Once, twice. Then again. Each time it paused near the windows, and that voice would start up again, always a little closer, always just calm enough to feel wrong. You left me. You promised we'd stick together. I trusted you. It wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was rehearsing, like it was trying out different emotions. Like it didn't quite know how to wear Kyle's voice, but was determined to keep trying until it found the right fit. I didn't sleep. I waited, motionless, while whatever it was prowled outside my van for hours. The moment before dawn, it stopped. Silence. And then one more knock. This time, it didn't even try to sound human. A low, groaning moan came through the metal. Long, distorted, a wet rattle like breath dragging across gravel. And then footsteps, moving away, into the trees. I didn't open the door until full daylight. When I stepped out, I expected to see footprints in the dirt again. Smears on the bumper, anything. But the only thing there was a single handprint, low on the passenger window, smudged, almost childlike in size, but with fingers just a little too long. The van reeked faintly of pine and sulfur. I didn't wait for checkout. I drove straight to the nearest gas station and filled up. Then I kept driving. Didn't care where. I just needed to move, to feel the road under me, and not the weight of that forest pressing in from every side. But the farther I got, the worse the feeling became. Not fear. Something else. Like a tether. Like something was stretching between me and those woods, trying to pull me back. By the time I reached Helena, I was half convinced I'd imagined it all. Lack of sleep, trauma, grief, hallucination. Then I checked the glove box. Kyle's photo was gone. In its place was a slip of torn bark, curled inward like a hand, with a single word carved in it. Liar. I drove through Montana like a fugitive, gas station to gas station, pulling over only to close my eyes for an hour or two in truck stops where the parking lots were loud and the light never went away. But no matter how far I got, the feeling stayed with me. I didn't understand it at the time. That invisible thread I couldn't shake. It wasn't just fear. It was guilt. Something I didn't know I'd buried was clawing its way up, and now it had a voice, a shape, a reason to haunt me. I told myself I was going to keep moving, maybe head south into Utah or Arizona where the woods couldn't reach me. But instead, I found myself circling back. Not all the way. Not to that same twisted grove where Kyle vanished, but close enough to feel its shadow again. There was a pull to it, a need to know. I ended up near Seeley Lake, a more developed area, less remote, and far enough from the last campground that I figured I could catch my breath. Campgrounds with hosts, a general store, tourists, safe. That night, I parked at a small RV spot called Clearwater Flats. There were 5 other campers nearby. Families, retirees, one solo traveler in a Sprinter van. Normal people with laughter and campfires and the smell of hot dogs and citronella candles filling the air. It felt human again, like maybe I'd finally stepped out of whatever dream I'd been trapped in. I slept with the windows cracked. That was a mistake. Around 3:30 in the morning, I woke up sweating. The temperature had dropped sharply, yet the air felt thick, like breathing through wet wool. My flashlight was dead, and my phone was stuck on a black screen, refusing to restart. I sat up, disoriented, and looked through the sliver of window. Every other RV had gone dark. Even the lanterns were out. It was like someone had unplugged the campground from reality. And then, movement. Just beyond the tree line, something walked by. Slowly, deliberately, like it knew I could see it, but also knew I wouldn't believe what I was seeing. It was tall, man-shaped, but off. I could only make out the silhouette, too thin, head slightly cocked, like it was listening for something I hadn't said yet. And behind it, something darker. A second shape that never quite stepped into view, but always seemed to shift just out of reach when I tried to focus on it. Then, a voice. But not like before. This one was more confident. You shouldn't have lied. It wasn't Kyle's voice. It was mine. Spoken in the exact rhythm I use when I record my stories, my vlogs, my thoughts. Except this one had no soul behind it. Just a hollow imitation, like something wearing my mouth. I snapped the curtains shut. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and then tapping. Not on the windows, on the roof. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't have to check to know what it meant. It was the code. Where are you? Except I wasn't asking it. It was asking me. I drove out of Clearwater Flats at first light, didn't even look back. My tires kicked up gravel like a warning to the trees. Stay back, stay behind, I'm not coming home with you. But by now, I knew the truth. Whatever was in those woods wasn't just there. It had found me. clung to something deep in me, maybe something I'd let in without realizing it. I spent the next week moving every night, sometimes cities, sometimes forests, always trying to stay just one step ahead of whatever shadow I disturbed. But you can't run from a place that lives inside you. And Kyle had known that. I remembered something he once said years ago, before this trip, before the planning, even before we bought the van. Some places aren't just haunted, man. They're hungry. They don't want to scare you. They want to become you. I laughed when he said it, thought it was just one of his dramatic monologues, the kind we used to make for our YouTube channel. But now I knew better. He'd been warning me, and he'd gone back anyway. I started having the dream about a week later. Always the same. I'm back in that forest alone, except I'm watching myself from a distance. Like a second version of me is camping there, unaware. Then Kyle steps out from behind a tree, pale, barefoot, clothes soaked with river water, and he whispers something I can never quite hear. Then the other me turns and smiles, too wide, too sharp, and his eyes are missing. I started avoiding mirrors after that, not just because of the dreams, but because sometimes I didn't recognize myself. I'd glance at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the side window, even a puddle outside a rest stop, and for a split second, there'd be a delay. Like my reflection was trying to remember how to move, how to match me. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion, trauma, stress, guilt. Any one of them could have explained it. That's what the rational voice said, the one that still clung to science and sleep schedules and logical outcomes. But the deeper voice, the one that wakes you up before the danger starts, the one that lives in your gut, it was screaming. I needed to go back, not because I wanted to find Kyle, but because I needed to face whatever we disturbed. And I knew, somehow, I just knew that if I didn't end this, it would keep following me, changing me, until the me people saw on the outside wasn't me at all. So I drove north again. The road back into the Montana wilderness felt different the second time. Not just the curves or elevation, but the atmosphere itself. The sky darkened too early. The temperature dropped even though it was June. Birds stayed quiet. Gas stations were half lit. Attendants silent, like they were expecting something they couldn't talk about. I didn't go back to the original site. I couldn't. Instead, I stopped at an old ranger station just outside the Bob Marshall Wilderness, one that had been converted into a seasonal info center. The woman behind the desk was maybe in her 60s, wiry gray hair and eyes like flint. Her name tag said Merle. I asked her about the lake, the small one, the one off the grid, hidden past the fire road. She didn't answer right away. Just looked at me. Not confused, not suspicious, just heavy. Like she'd seen that lake too many times in her sleep. "You hear things out there?" she finally asked. I nodded. "See things?" Another nod. She leaned forward, her voice low. "You lose anyone?" I didn't answer. Didn't have to. Merle stood up, walked behind the counter, and returned with a worn manila folder. No label, just a water stain on one corner and a faint, musty smell that hit me like an old basement. She opened it. Inside were hand-drawn maps, Polaroids like a few photocopied missing person reports, and a page torn from a journal. She slid the journal page toward me. I read it silently. "I saw myself again last night. He was camped across the fire, same clothes, same boots, but wrong. And he smiled when I screamed. I think that's how it learns, by watching us fear ourselves." Merle didn't blink. "Most folks think it's bears or cliffs or weather," she said, "but there's something older in those woods, something that waits for people running from themselves." I asked her why she was showing me all this. She looked me dead in the eyes. "Because you already brought it with you, and if you're going to survive, you need to know what you're fighting." I stayed the night in the ranger station parking lot, not because I felt safe, I didn't, but because I couldn't move. I sat in the dark for hours, reading the journal page over and over. Then, around midnight, I heard it. Soft footsteps circling the van. At first, I thought it might be a deer. Then I remembered the gravel. Deer don't wear boots. I grabbed my flashlight and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. No one was there, but something was pressed into the condensation on the outside of the window. A handprint, too wide, too long, fingers unnaturally stretched, and scrawled beneath it in streaked lines, "Where are you?" I shut the curtain, locked the door, and sat with my back to it until morning. At first light, I walked back into the ranger station. Merle was gone, no sign she'd ever been there. The maps, the folder, all vanished. The desk was clean, the logbook empty, no other cars in the lot. And that's when I realized there was no ranger station listed on my map. The building was real, but it wasn't on anything. No GPS coordinates, no Forest Service ID, nothing. I got in the van and drove until the tank was almost empty. My hands shook the entire time. I made it to a rest area just outside Helena before the fuel light forced me to stop. By then, it felt like something was inside the van with me. Not physically, not yet, but like a pressure in the corners of my eyes, always just out of view. I'd glance at the passenger seat, swearing I saw motion, but nothing was ever there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake in the driver's seat, window cracked for air, doors locked, a knife in my lap that felt increasingly useless. Around 3:30 a.m., the air turned metallic, not in temperature, but in smell. That old, iron scent of blood. It drifted through the cracked window like fog. I rolled it up fast and looked out. Across the lot, under a flickering light post, stood a figure, same height as me, same build, and in the pale, buzzing light, I saw something that dropped a pit into my stomach. It wore my jacket. Not just a jacket like mine, my actual jacket, same tear at the elbow, same stain on the collar from when I dropped coffee at Glacier Point last summer. He was facing away, but even from behind, I could feel his attention on me, like his spine was listening. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned, and I saw my own face staring back at me, blank, emotionless, like it hadn't learned how to pretend yet. I threw the van into reverse, tires squealing, adrenaline wiping away every rational thought. The figure didn't move, just watched me, let me go. It wanted me to leave. I didn't stop driving until sunrise. When I finally pulled into a gas station near Bozeman, the girl behind the counter gave me a double take. "Rough night?" she asked. I looked in the mirror behind her, and I understood why she asked. My eyes weren't right. Too wide, pupils dilated, skin pale like I hadn't been in the sun for weeks. And a long scratch down my cheek that I hadn't noticed until just then, like something had marked me in my sleep or while I was awake. I filled up and kept moving. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't dealing with something that wanted to kill me. Not directly. It wanted to become me. It was wearing me like a mask, testing it out, learning how I spoke, how I moved, how I reacted to fear. Every time I panicked, it watched, studied, learned. It wasn't hunting in the traditional sense. It was copying. And I think somewhere back there, maybe in the trees or at the lake or behind that empty ranger desk, it had already gotten Kyle. That's why I needed to go back. Not to save him, but to make sure I wasn't next. I waited 2 more days, bought gear, stocked the van with supplies, water, food, cameras, recorders, anything I could think of. I even duct taped mirrors to the trees near my sleeping area, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd catch it watching. I drove back to the wilderness and took a different route this time, a narrow trail that cut behind the lake, deeper into the trees, avoiding the fire road. Every step felt wrong. Not like I shouldn't be there, but like I was already there, like I was retracing steps that had been made without me. I set up camp in a small clearing, hung talismans from the trees, dumb little charms I'd bought from a trading post that claimed to keep spirits at bay. It felt silly, but fear does that, makes you believe in things you used to laugh at. That night, I left the fire burning low and sat with a camera aimed into the trees, just watching. Hours passed. The woods stayed still. Then, sometime after 2 a.m., I saw movement. Not in the trees, in the mirrors, the ones I duct taped earlier. In one of them, just over my shoulder, a figure moved. It was me. But I was still sitting. The reflection moved. I didn't. I turned slowly, breath held, and there he was, standing at the edge of camp, barefoot, smiling, like he'd been waiting for me to return. He didn't move. He didn't need to, just stood there grinning as if amused that I'd bothered to come back, like I was the last piece of some joke he'd been telling the forest. His face was mine, but wrong. Just slightly off, like a bad photocopy, too symmetrical, too smooth, and behind the eyes, nothing, no flicker, no pain, no memory, just a cold, mechanical stillness, like someone had drawn a human from memory and missed the part about the soul. I raised the flashlight, not to see better, but to make myself feel braver. The beam hit him square in the face, just once. That blink changed everything. Because when he opened his eyes again, they were mine. Same bags under the lids, same tired crow's feet. And in that moment, I understood something horrifying. This thing, it wasn't just copying, it was consuming. Every moment of fear, every second of doubt, it fed on it, grew from it, refined the mimicry, learned faster, and I had fed it well. I should have run. I didn't. I stepped forward. "You're not me," I said, my voice shaking but honest. "You're a shadow, a glitch." It tilted its head and then it spoke. "I'm better." The voice was mine too, perfectly pitched, but it had none of my uncertainty, none of my doubt. It was stronger, more sure. Like the version of me I sometimes wished I could be, if I didn't feel things so deeply, if I didn't second guess, if I didn't carry the weight of guilt or fear or love. I realized then it didn't want to kill me. It wanted to replace me. And not just out here. Back home. It would take my face, my van, my voice. It would drive to the places I loved, speak to the people I cared about, and they wouldn't know. Not right away, until they noticed the smile never reached the eyes, or the way it never blinked quite right, or the way it seemed to watch them even when it wasn't looking. I backed away, but it stepped forward, no sudden movements, just patient progress, like it had done this before, like this was the final part of the hunt. Not the kill, but the exchange. I spun and ran, through the trees, over the rocks. I tore down the talismans and threw them behind me, not because I thought they'd stop it, but because I wanted to leave a mess, a mark, proof that something had gone wrong here. It followed. I didn't hear footsteps, just the sound of breathing, my breathing, but it wasn't coming from my lungs. It was all around me, like the forest had become an echo chamber of my own panic. Branches tore at my arms, my knees buckled. I caught myself against a stump and gasped, and that gasp came back at me threefold from the dark. I reached the van, keys shaking in my hand. I nearly snapped them in half trying to fit them into the lock. The door swung open, and I dove inside, slamming it shut behind me. Silence. I turned the ignition. Nothing. Dead. Not even a click. My phone, no signal. My flashlight flickered and went black. I was alone, or I should have been, but then I saw the rearview mirror twitch, and there, sitting in the back seat, was me, smiling, waiting. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared into the rearview mirror, watching my own reflection smile back at me. But it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was him, the other me. Sitting there like he'd always belonged, hands resting casually on his knees, head tilted in quiet amusement. He didn't rush. He didn't threaten. He just was. And somehow that was worse. I blinked, and he wasn't in the mirror anymore. I spun around, empty. But the seatbelt in the back was fastened, still warm. I climbed into the driver's seat like I was wading into deep water, every breath shallow, every movement deliberate. I pressed the ignition again, still dead. "Okay," I muttered, clutching the wheel, whispering more to myself than anything else. "This isn't happening. This is stress, sleep deprivation. Low blood sugar, rational explanations." But the cold in the air had a presence, a weight, the kind that settled into your bones and made every excuse feel ridiculous. I wasn't tired. I wasn't imagining this. I was seen, known, matched. That version of me, whatever it was, had been waiting, learning, and now I'd brought it back to the van, to my world. I locked every door. Then I crawled into the back, feeling like a cornered animal. I didn't want to sleep, but I didn't know what else to do. So I sat there in the darkness, knees to my chest, trying not to breathe too loud. Time passed like molasses. My watch had stopped ticking. No signal, no sound, just the occasional creak of pine above and the wind pushing against the windows like it wanted in. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell anymore. I must have drifted off. What woke me wasn't a noise. It was the smell. Not rot, not decay. Me. My cologne. The exact brand I wore back in college, one I hadn't touched in over a decade. Sharp, clean, nostalgic, impossible. I opened my eyes and instantly wished I hadn't, because he was back. Outside the van now, inches from the window, staring in, same face, same expressionless gaze. His breath fogged the glass in slow, perfect circles. He didn't knock, didn't press his face against the window, just watched. Calm, certain, waiting for me to doubt myself again. And I almost did, because there's a strange power in familiarity, in seeing your own face out there in the dark. It messes with your sense of boundaries, of ownership, of reality. Makes you wonder if you're the imposter. If maybe you're the one who wandered too far into the woods. Maybe you never made it back. But I knew better. I'd felt him inside my head. I crawled forward, heart pounding, fumbling for the glove box. If I couldn't start the van, I'd leave on foot. Daylight couldn't be far off, and this thing didn't seem to like movement. It stalked, mirrored. It wanted submission. I pushed the door open and froze. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No birds, no bugs, not even wind. And in the center of that stillness stood a mirror, a full-length antique mirror propped up against a tree about 20 feet away, right where the dirt road should have been. That's when I remembered what Mary had said, what she'd tried to warn me about before her voice cut out. If you see your reflection out there, don't trust it. Don't follow it. But there it was, me again in the mirror, arms at my sides, still, calm. And then he blinked twice, once for me, once for him. I backed up and slammed the van door shut again. I didn't care if it was crazy. I grabbed my journal, a can of beans, my last working flashlight, and bolted through the back exit of the van into the trees behind the site, opposite the mirror. I wasn't going to be baited. I wasn't going to follow a reflection like some poor animal led to slaughter. Branches whipped my arms. I didn't stop. Not to rest. Not to think. I needed to get above tree line. Higher ground meant more visibility, more chance for signal, for help, or at least daylight. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed, until I stumbled onto a narrow ridge overlooking the valley, just in time to watch the sun start to rise over the peaks. And with it, silence finally broke. The forest breathed again, crows shrieked, wind returned, the air shimmered with golden light, and the presence was gone. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I felt alone again. Utterly, painfully, beautifully alone. I sat down in the dirt and laughed. That kind of cracked, exhausted laugh that's half a sob. I wasn't sure if I'd made it out or just entered another layer of whatever this place was. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going back to the van. I stayed on that ridge until the sun was fully up, warm light melting away the frost that had coated the rocks overnight. Every shadow that disappeared felt like a layer of pressure being peeled from my chest. But I didn't feel safe, just tolerated, like whatever had been hunting me had chosen for now to let me go. But I knew it was still nearby. There were no trails up here, no road. My van was miles downslope, somewhere near that cursed clearing. And even from up high, I couldn't see the roof of it, like it had been swallowed by the forest or erased. I checked my phone again. Nothing. Then I pulled out my journal and flipped through the last few pages I'd written. Some of it was gibberish, scribbles in the margins I didn't remember making, a list of numbers, some words repeated over and over in all caps. Not me. Not me. Not me. Had that been me? Or the other? I tore those pages out, folded them into my jacket, and stuffed the rest of the notebook deep into my backpack. I didn't want to carry that energy with me, but I couldn't leave it behind either, not where someone else might stumble across it. For hours, I moved downhill, circling wide around where I guessed the van still was. I didn't want to risk a straight path, not with those mirrors out there. And I was done playing brave. This wasn't just another ghost story. It wasn't some unexplained wilderness mystery. It was deliberate. Something was out here and it wanted me to come back. It knew how to push, through memory, through reflection, through doubt. The deeper I went, the more the terrain shifted. Rocks bled rust red. Trees leaned in odd directions, not bent by wind, but like they were reacting to something underground. A few had bark that looked scorched, as if lightning had struck repeatedly but never burned them down. And that smell again. The cologne. Faint, but following. The same one I'd worn when I first drove west, chasing freedom. The one I bought when I wanted to feel like someone else. That scent had never meant danger to me, until now. Now it felt like a trap, a scent trail meant to lure me back. By noon, I found a ranger's post, abandoned, rusted, half sunken into the slope like the earth wanted it back. But inside there was a faded map still pinned to the wall. I traced my finger from the general area of the van up toward the ridge, then toward the old fire roads near the northwestern range. There, a small dot marked Cooper's Run Lookout. That name. I knew that name. It was in the background of one of the photos Mary had texted me before her message cut off. I hiked straight toward it. The trail wasn't obvious, but the elevation change was promising. If I could get to a lookout tower, I might have a shot at finding cell service. Or at least a radio. Something. Anything. The sun was dipping low again when I spotted it. Perched high above a narrow bluff, the tower rose from the trees like a survivor. Weathered. Faded. But intact. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, every step a prayer that the structure wouldn't collapse beneath me. When I reached the top, I nearly wept. There, taped to the inside of the door, was a list of emergency radio channels. And below it, a small battery-powered transmitter. Dead. I scoured every drawer, every cabinet, every bit of gear left behind by whoever had manned this place decades ago. And in the bottom of an old footlocker, bingo, batteries. Corroded, but one or two still had some charge. I jammed them into the unit and turned the dial, static, crackling. Then, if anyone can hear this, this is Ranger Outpost 92. We need immediate assistance. Repeat, lost hikers near Bull Elk Canyon. My voice was shaking when I leaned in. This is a civilian. I'm near Cooper's Run Lookout. I need help. My name is... I hesitated. What was my name? A strange blankness filled my mind. Not fear, not confusion, just absence. I dropped the mic and sat down hard on the wooden floor. The radio crackled again. Different voice this time. Older, clearer. Did you see yourself out there? The voice asked calmly. If you did, it's already inside. You understand? I froze. Don't answer. The voice continued. It listens. The transmission cut. I stood in silence, the air around me still and cold. In the corner of the lookout was a shattered mirror. Its edges were scorched. Someone had broken it violently and burned it afterward. But even in those fragments, I could still see pieces of myself. Smiling. Only in the reflection I was still holding the radio, still speaking. But I hadn't said a word. I backed away slowly. Careful. Deliberate. Then I kicked every shard of glass off the tower and watched them disappear into the woods below. If it wanted a way in, it wouldn't be through that anymore. Night was falling fast now, and I had a decision to make. Stay in the tower, exposed, but above the threat, or keep moving, deeper into the woods, away from everything I knew, chasing whatever message that ranger had left for me. Neither choice felt safe. But the tower, at least here I could see. And for once, maybe that was enough. For now, I didn't sleep that night, even with the door bolted, the windows shut tight, and my pocket knife gripped white knuckle in one hand. I didn't close my eyes for more than a blink. I kept replaying that voice on the radio. If you saw yourself, it's already inside. That one line gutted every ounce of courage I had left, because I had seen myself. In the mirror, in the reflections in the van, in the water, and in that last sliver of glass. My reflection smiled while I stood frozen. I watched the forest for hours, eyes scanning every shadow, every ripple of wind in the trees. The stars above Montana are otherworldly. Millions of them, all sharp and cold and distant. It felt like they were watching too. Somewhere near midnight, the forest changed again. The air pressed in, not cold this time, but thick, like fog with weight. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. The The kind of pressure you get deep underwater or standing at the edge of something ancient and unforgiving. Then the sound came, not footsteps, not animals, breathing, slow, deep, like lungs too big to belong to anything human. Right below the tower, I didn't move, didn't breathe. I pressed myself against the wall and waited. The breathing stopped, and then I heard it, a voice, my voice, drifting up from the forest floor. "Hey," it said casually, "you dropped something." I peered through the boards of the window. Below, at the base of the tower, stood a shape that looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same posture, same everything, except for the eyes. Even in the dark, they gleamed. Not with light, with intent. The thing held up the page I had torn from my journal, the one with the scribbles, the one that read "not me" over and over again. It waved it slowly, mocking, and then it laughed, just a soft, breathy chuckle. The kind you make when you realize someone finally understands the joke, and the joke is them. I turned from the window and slid down the wall, covering my ears. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be it. I stayed curled there until the sun crested the horizon. When I finally stood and looked again, the thing was gone. The page, too. But on the wooden landing outside the tower, scrawled in something red and tacky, were 3 words: "You made it." I left the lookout just after dawn. No more detours, no more exploring. I hiked fast, reckless. I didn't eat, didn't stop to drink. I pushed myself until my legs gave out, and I collapsed beside a logging road where I was finally found by a real search team. 2 days later, I was back in town. My van, still parked where I left it. No damage, no sign of forced entry, except the mirror inside had been wiped clean. Not dusty like the rest of the van. Not cracked, just spotless. Like someone or something had used it. I sold the van a week later, packed a single duffel, and flew home. I've never gone back to Montana. Not because of the wildlife, not because of the terrain, but because I saw something out there. Something that wears you. And once you've seen it, once it sees you, it doesn't need to follow you. It's already in. And now, when I walk past windows late at night, when I catch a glimpse in a dark screen or a shopfront reflection, I flinch, because sometimes if I look long enough, I'm still standing still, but my reflection is smiling. Story 3. You ever notice how the woods can feel like they're watching you? Not just that eerie sense of being alone. No, I mean the way the silence bends. The way the air thickens when you take one wrong step off the trail. You're still you, but you're not alone anymore. You feel it. Deep. Like something ancient just woke up and realized you were there. That's how the Appalachian Mountains introduced themselves to me. I wasn't a first-time camper. I'd done my fair share of weekend getaways in the van. 27 years old, living out of my Volkswagen Westphalia part-time, free and wandering like everyone romanticizes online. But I wasn't naive. I knew about bears, steep drop-offs, dehydration. I wasn't stupid. What I wasn't prepared for was how quiet evil could be. It started as a trip to reconnect. That's how I justified it, anyway. My brother Matt had gone missing on the Appalachian Trail 6 years earlier. We were never super close, not after high school, but he was blood. No trace of him was ever found. Not his boots, not his gear, not even a note. It haunted my mom until the day she died. Haunted me too, even though I didn't want to admit it. So I set out to finish the hike he never came back from. Not all 2,000 miles, just a stretch in the Smokies where his last GPS ping came from. My plan was simple. Drive the VW van up through North Carolina, camp in the woods for a few days, retrace the old ranger reports, and maybe leave something behind for him. Closure, I guess. I wasn't really expecting anything. Or maybe I was. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet. I parked near Klingman's Dome, where the sky rolls wide and the fog hugs every branch like it's afraid to let go. The forest was damp, heavy with early spring chill. Everything smelled like decaying pine needles and wet stone. There were a few other hikers around, but they felt distant, like characters in a dream you're only half part of. I kept mostly to myself. I spent my days wandering marked trails, taking notes from an old ranger report I'd printed out. I carried a laminated map in my back pocket like it was scripture, marking out campsites and trail junctions my brother might have passed through. One afternoon, I came across an old fire ring that didn't show up on any map. It was just off the trail, maybe 20 yards into a thicket that didn't look like much until you stepped through. The place was still, way too still. Like the wind didn't have permission to blow there. I crouched down, running my hand over the blackened stones. No recent ash, but something was off. The stones were warm. Now I know how that sounds. There wasn't a soul around. It was cloudy, barely 50 degrees out. I hadn't seen another camper in hours. But those stones, they radiated heat like a dying breath. I stood fast, scanned the trees, nothing. Just that thick, oppressive quiet. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself a lot of things. That night, back in the van, I couldn't shake it. I kept hearing little thuds outside. Footsteps, maybe. Too soft for a deer, too spaced for a raccoon. But when I cracked the door open with my flashlight, nothing moved. Just fog. Thick, soupy, swallowing the beam within 5 feet. I slammed the door shut and locked it like I was a kid again. Slept in the driver's seat with a pocket knife clutched in my palm. The next day, something else was different. When I stepped out to pee, I saw it. A smear of black soot on the passenger side door. A full palm print. Too big to be mine. Too long, and not fresh. The way it dried, it looked old. Charred. Like whoever touched the van had come straight from a house fire. I wiped it off without thinking and told myself it was tree sap. It wasn't, but denial's easy when you're tired. I pressed on. Hiked deeper that day, further off trail into areas the rangers didn't like to talk about. Places they said weren't unsafe, just difficult to monitor. That's government speak for people disappear here and we don't like to explain why. Around mile 7, I found a clearing with a single tree in the middle, dead, bleached gray, and split down the middle like it had been struck by lightning decades ago. Nothing grew within 15 feet of it. No grass, no moss, just dirt and silence. I stood there for a long time. My instincts screamed to leave, but some part of me couldn't. It was like something underneath my ribs was vibrating. That's when I found it. Just beyond the clearing, beneath a tangle of roots, I saw it. A blue bandana. Faded, weather-stained, but unmistakably familiar. My brother wore that exact one in his last photo. I grabbed it. I shouldn't have. The moment I touched it, the air changed. You know that sharp static smell right before a thunderstorm? Like metal and ozone? That's what hit me. But the sky was clear. No wind, no clouds, and yet the hairs on my arms stood up like I was under a power line. I stuffed the bandana in my pack and practically jogged back to the van. I didn't realize until I was halfway back that I hadn't heard a single bird all day. No squirrels, no insects. The forest had gone. Quiet. That kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. That kind of quiet where your breath sounds too loud and your heartbeat echoes in your skull. Back at the van, I double-checked the locks. I kept the bandana in my lap as I drove into the nearest town just to breathe around other people again. The gas station clerk gave me a strange look, like she recognized me or maybe smelled something weird. "You been up in the hollers?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. I nodded. Told her I was hiking near Klingman's. She just shook her head. "They don't come back from there." I asked who they were. She didn't answer. That night, I stayed in a motel. Just one night, just to reset. I left the bandana on the bathroom counter while I showered, hoping hot water might shake the weirdness off me. But when I got out, the bandana was gone. I tore the place apart, searched every drawer, the trash, under the bed. Nothing. Just steam and the creeping sense that maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd stirred up something that didn't want to be found. I drove back to the van the next morning, parked again at the same overlook, and tried to tell myself none of this meant anything. People lose things. Trees die. Fires get lit. Prints get left. But that logic started to crack, and that's when the voices began. It started faint, barely audible, just a whisper outside the van right at dusk. One voice, then two, low and slow, speaking in a language I didn't understand, or maybe just too soft to make out. I froze. Turned off every light in the van, curled up behind the sink and listened. The voices circled the van once, twice, then silence. No footsteps, no crunch of gravel, just gone. But when I finally worked up the courage to look out the curtain-covered window, I saw it again. The same palm print on the glass, same size, same blackened ash. Only this time it was smeared downward, like someone had dragged their hand slowly across the window watching me, and they wanted me to know they'd been there. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. Every time I started to drift, I thought I heard breathing, just outside the van. It wasn't the wind. It was too slow, too steady, like someone was leaning their face right up against the wall of the camper, waiting for me to make a sound. And under it, I swear, I could hear the whispering again, like it was under the van this time. Not moving, just waiting. Come morning, I was wired with fear and no plan. I threw open the sliding door as the sun broke through the tree line. No one there, just fog curling along the asphalt and the faint smell of smoke. But not wood smoke, more chemical, sharp, like burnt hair and engine oil. I had to get out, so I drove. No map, no destination, just drove west out of the park. But 30 minutes in, I passed the same overlook I'd camped at the first night. Same spot, same crooked pine stump, same damn ravens on the guardrail. That was impossible. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't taken a loop. But here I was, back where I started. I pulled over and opened the glove box, digging out my phone and a folded-up topographic map. GPS wouldn't load. No signal. Not even a bar. I tried the old compass I kept in the console as a backup. North spun uselessly in circles. It hit me then, not just that I was lost. Something didn't want me to leave. And that's when I noticed something else. The bandana. The one that had vanished from the motel. It was back, tied around my rearview mirror, dangling like some cursed souvenir. But now it was clean, too clean. No dirt, no fray, as if it had never been buried, as if it hadn't aged a day. I stared at it, hands shaking. A chill ran down my back, not from the cold, but from the realization that something was toying with me. Not killing me. Not yet. Just watching. Testing. I slammed the van into gear and headed for a ranger station I'd passed 2 days before. I remembered its name, Big Chestnut Outpost. Took a hard right down a gravel service road I jotted on the map, but the station was gone. Not burned, not collapsed. Gone. Just an empty lot. No tire tracks, no signposts, just moss-covered gravel and the skeletal frame of what might have once been a porch. I got out, walked the perimeter. That's when I noticed them, boot prints, dozens of them, scattered, circling, almost frantic, like people had been running. Some prints led into the woods, but none came out. That's when I heard it again, not a whisper this time, a single word, spoken in a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years. Ryan. My brother's voice. Plain as day. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. My name echoed off the trees, soft but close, like he was standing right behind me. I turned, expecting nothing. Or maybe something. No one was there. But 10 feet away, wedged in the crook of a blackened pine, was my brother's old trail journal. The cover was torn, half melted, but the initials were his, scrawled in permanent marker MC-AT 2018. I grabbed it and flipped it open. The first few pages were normal. His gear list, a couple daily logs, food notes. But then, halfway through, the handwriting changed. Letters slanted. Lines broke mid-sentence, as if he was rushing or afraid. The last entry chilled me to the core. He walks like a man but doesn't breathe like one. Comes when it gets quiet. I see others, but their eyes don't blink. If you find this, don't listen to him. Don't follow the voice that sounds like me. I dropped the journal like it was radioactive, and then everything went silent again. The birds, the breeze, even the sound of leaves rustling under my boots. I ran, sprinting back to the van, slammed the door and twisted the ignition, half expecting the engine not to start. But it did, roared to life like it knew I was terrified. The road back was different, felt longer, like it stretched and curled behind me, warping the more I drove. The trees leaned closer, shadows lengthened too fast. More than once, I thought I saw someone step out of the brush in my rearview mirror. But when I stopped, there was nothing. That night, I pulled into a well-lit Kiowa campground near Cherokee. I didn't care about the noise, the RVs, the families playing cards outside. I needed people. I needed lights. I needed out of the woods, and for a few hours it worked. I parked between two Class A's and tried to pretend I was just another tourist. But at 2:33 a.m., I woke up gasping. The van was ice cold, colder than it should have been in April. My breath curled in front of my face like smoke. The windows were fogged over from the inside, and the whispering was back, but this time it wasn't outside. It was inside the van. I shot up, flicked on my headlamp, and spun around, expecting God knows what, but there was no one there. Only fog, thick, swirling. And in it, just for a split second, I saw a face. Not my brother's. Something older, pale, cracked, like bark peeled from a tree. Black eyes, too deep for any human skull. A grin like a scar that never healed right. Then it vanished. The fog thinned, the temperature snapped back to normal, and the van was empty again. But that scarred grin burned into my memory like fire. I left at sunrise. No coffee, no breakfast, just the bitter taste of something I couldn't explain and didn't want to. I drove for hours, trying to get out of the mountains, but the deeper I went, the more wrong things started to feel, like the roads were turning behind me, like the GPS wasn't confused, it was being lied to. And that's when I realized something that made my blood run colder than it ever had before. Every person I passed on the road, hikers, gas station workers, even a couple standing outside their trailer, none of them blinked. Not once. Not even when they turned their heads to follow me. Like puppets. Hollow. Watching. I made it to a diner on the edge of the park just before dark, one of those highway places with trucker coffee and burnt pie. It was real. Or felt real. The waitress blinked. Her hands shook when I asked about disappearances in the area. "You're not the first to come asking," she said. I asked who else had. She hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder like someone was listening. "Some folks say this place don't run on normal time," she whispered. "Not all the land here is ours. Some spots belong to older things, spirits maybe, or worse." I asked her about the thing I saw. The face. She paled. "They say it takes the voice of someone you miss," she said. "Uses it like bait. If you hear it once, you're marked." Marked. That word lodged in me like a thorn. I hadn't told her what I heard, but somehow she knew. I didn't finish my food, didn't pay. I just walked out, sat in my van, and stared at the woods beyond the lot. Something was in there, and it had my brother's voice. I don't remember pulling back onto the road. I just remember the silence in my chest, that kind that comes after the panic settles, when you've run out of adrenaline but not fear. It's a colder feeling, sharper, like the body realizes it's on its own. The van rolled forward, headlights cutting across the trees, and I swear the shadows leaned with me. I wasn't even sure where I was heading anymore. All I knew was I couldn't stay still. I couldn't stop. That waitress's words echoed, "If you hear it once, you're marked." And I had. I'd heard my brother's voice. I'd seen a face I couldn't explain. I'd read a journal that should have been ash years ago. And the more I tried to convince myself I was just grieving, just tired, the more the world around me bent in ways that logic couldn't straighten. But I still didn't turn around. That's the worst part. Even with everything, some part of me wanted to keep going. Not because I was brave, but because the voice sounded so real, so alive. And if there was even the smallest chance that Mark was still out there, that's the thing about grief. It doesn't just weigh you down, it drives you. Off cliffs, into caves, back to places you swore you'd never go again. And for me, it drove me straight into the dark heart of the Appalachians. I found myself on a narrow road that didn't exist on the map. No signage, just a rusty gate left hanging open like someone wanted it to feel like a mistake, but it wasn't. There were fresh tire tracks on the dirt, and I followed them. About 5 miles in, the trees parted to reveal a clearing. And in the middle sat a rotted-out ranger station. Not a real one, not the kind built by the government. This was older, hand-built. Logs stacked with care, dark with age, roof caved in, windows empty. But there was a light inside, a single flickering oil lamp, glowing orange like a dying ember. I parked the van and stepped out, breath catching in the cold. The air smelled of wet leaves and something else, something coppery, faint but sharp, like blood in snow. I should have left. God, I should have left, but my legs moved forward, one step, then another. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the floor was warped and damp, but the walls, every inch of them, were covered in carvings. Names, hundreds of them, etched deep, some I recognized. Mark's was there, so was Lily Harper, the missing girl from that flyer I saw, and dozens more. Most first names only, some with years next to them, some with nothing. And then I saw mine. Fresh, still dripping with sap like it had just been carved. That's when I heard the second voice. This one wasn't Mark. This one was mine, coming from the back room. Not a recording, not a trick of sound, my exact voice, repeating the same thing over and over. Don't go in, don't go in, don't go in. But I did. The back room was smaller, darker. The lamplight didn't reach far, but in the far corner was a mirror, old, cracked, covered in dust. And in it, I saw myself, standing still. But the reflection moved. It smiled, a slow, unnatural curl, not with joy, not even menace. It was mimicking, testing, trying the shape of my face, and behind it, just for a breath of a second, I saw Mark, emaciated, pale, eyes black and wet like river stones, mouth open but no sound coming out, like he was trapped behind the glass, screaming without a voice. I backed out fast, hit the wall. The reflection didn't. It kept walking toward me. That's when the whispering returned, but layered now. Dozens of voices, all almost familiar, all wrong. Stay, they breathed. You know this place. You belong here. I ran, tripped on the steps, tore my shoulder open on a branch, sprinted through the clearing like something was inches behind me. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I did, I knew I wouldn't move again. I slammed into the van, engine already running. I didn't remember starting it. The headlights cut through the mist, and just at the edge of them, I saw something tall, towering, wrong. It didn't have a face, not a real one, just the idea of a face, shifting, like it was made of smoke and borrowed memories, like it wore people the way people wear jackets, one at a time, then discarded. I peeled out of there, gravel flying, tires screaming. I didn't care where I ended up. I just knew I had to get lower, out of the mountains, away from it. I don't remember much of the drive. There are flashes. I remember seeing the same sign for Blue Hollow Camp 3 times, even though I never turned. I remember my own voice on the radio, reading weather updates in a monotone that didn't blink. I remember the van dying for 10 full minutes in the middle of a 1-lane bridge, and something tapping slowly on the back window until the engine kicked back to life. And I remember the feeling that I wasn't driving away from something anymore. I was carrying it with me. It had my name, my voice, my memories, and I'd given it something even deeper than that. Hope. That's what it feeds on, I think. Not just fear, not just pain, but hope. The belief that maybe, just maybe, someone we love could still be out there. That's the bait. And the hook is what it shows you when you take a step too far. I finally got out of the park sometime before dawn, rolled into a Walmart parking lot and sat there for an hour. Engine off, no music, just watching the sunrise over the flat concrete. So normal it felt sacred, but the thing is, even now I can still hear it sometimes, usually in the spaces between sleep and waking, when my mind's quiet enough for it to creep in. It always starts the same. Ryan, my brother's voice, and I swear to you, it sounds closer every time. The human mind has this uncanny ability to reshape trauma into something manageable. A dull shape, a softened edge. We put it in a box. We label it hallucination, grief, sleep deprivation, whatever helps it fit on the shelf next to taxes and grocery lists and oil changes. And for weeks, I tried. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real. I told myself the mountains had done what they do to a lot of people. Got in my head, stirred things around, whispered old ghosts back to life. I cleaned out the van. I dumped the journal in a public trash can 2 counties away. I even got the mirrors in the van professionally replaced, just in case. But you can't scrub out something that's in you. and something from those woods had found its way in. It was subtle at first, a smell that didn't belong, like burning pine pitch when I was parked in a treeless desert, or a faint wet earth scent when the skies were bone dry. The kind of smells that bring memories, not pleasant ones, not nostalgic, but primal, like a warning before the storm. Then came the sounds. Once, while camped outside Knoxville, I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of dragging feet around the van. I grabbed the flashlight, waited. The footsteps circled twice, slow and heavy. I burst out the side door, ready to confront some weirdo, but no one was there. Just empty gravel. No footprints, no breeze, nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. But what really started to break me was the laughter. Not loud, not deranged, just soft, broken chuckles, always just beyond the thin metal skin of the van. Sometimes near the windshield, sometimes behind the back bumper. It never came from the same place twice, and it never lasted more than 5 seconds. Long enough to make me freeze, short enough to make me question if I'd heard it at all. One night in Southern Virginia, I snapped, pulled over off an old coal road, grabbed my phone and opened the audio recorder, determined to catch it. I sat in silence for an hour, just waiting. Nothing, just bugs, wind, and then right as I started to hit stop, a whisper. Not laughter this time, it was me. My voice, soft, flat, repeating something I hadn't said. I saw it, I brought it, it's inside. I nearly threw the phone. Instead, I deleted the recording. Then I drove. I didn't care what direction, I just needed distance. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about geography anymore. This thing, whatever it was, didn't live in the woods. Not really. It lived in memory, in belief. And I had fed it every mile since. I started reaching out, quietly, online, forums, Reddit, VW camping groups, asking around without asking too much. Anyone camp near Ashburn Ridge? Any strange stories from the Appalachians? I masked it with curiosity, pretending I was a writer, that I was compiling spooky tales for a side project. But one night, someone responded. A woman named Elise. Her message was short. I know what you saw, I heard it too. It uses them. Let's talk. Not here. She sent a burner email, asked me to meet her in person, said she was in Harlan, Kentucky. It was barely 4 hours away. I didn't even hesitate. When I arrived, she was already waiting. Thin, weathered. Early 40s, maybe. Looked like someone who'd slept in her van one too many nights for comfort. Her eyes had that same hollowness I saw in mine every time I caught my reflection off guard. We sat at a diner, ordered coffee. She didn't touch hers. I was on the trail near where you camped, she said without preamble. Not far from that ghost town. Spring of 16. I was with my partner, Matt. We were hiking. Van parked back at the base of the ridge. Her fingers shook, but not from cold. We heard it on night 3. His voice, calling me from the trees, asking for help. She looked at me, jaw tight. Matt never made it out. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. She leaned in, whispering now. They call it the borrower. Locals won't say the name, but that's what it does. It borrows voices, faces, bits of people left behind. You don't see it at first. You feel it. And when you start talking to it, when you start believing, that's when it really wakes up. I asked her what it wanted. To be remembered, she said. To stay alive. That's why it uses people we've lost. It knows how we carry our dead. If it can get you to listen, that's enough. That's the invitation. Her voice cracked. Matt's voice still calls sometimes. I don't answer anymore. But the thing is, part of me wants to. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. Is there a way to stop it? I asked. She looked down at her untouched cup. There's a ritual. Not one of those occult ones, something simpler. It's about closing the door you opened. You have to go back, alone. You have to listen, then reject it. Fully. Out loud. Burn something of the person it took. And you can't look back, no matter what it shows you. Everything in me screamed against the idea. I wanted distance, not return. But some part of me, a quiet part, knew she was right. The only way out was through. We said nothing for a while. She passed me a folded paper with hand-drawn directions. Not to the ranger station, but past it. Deeper. A place the maps didn't mark. They used to call it Hollow Bend, she said. Used to be a mine there, collapsed decades ago. That's where it roots, where it remembers. Go there, speak, burn what needs to burn. I thanked her. She just nodded. Got up, left. I never saw her again. 2 nights later, I was back in the van, back in the Appalachians. The wind sounded different that time, less like wind, more like breath. And as I neared the ridge, the forest didn't feel like trees anymore. It felt like walls. I didn't park in the same place as last time. I couldn't. The memory of that first night, the fog, the wet ground, the sound of something breathing just beyond the thin plastic of my tent was too fresh, too raw. So I found a turnout a quarter-mile south, pulled in, and sat in silence for almost an hour. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I stepped out. The air didn't hum. It pulsed, like the entire forest was alive with its own slow heartbeat. My boots sank slightly into the mud as I started up the unmarked trail Elise had drawn for me. No signs, no cairns, just instinct, and a growing sense that I was heading toward the eye of something very old and very patient. I carried 3 things in my pack: a flare, my flashlight, and a photograph. The photograph was one I had taken years ago when I first bought the van. It was me and my older brother Luke standing next to the driver's side. He had been the first person to teach me how to drive stick, taught me how to camp, taught me how to ignore the panic and trust the trees. He also died on the same mountain ridge 4 years before. Drowned in a flood on an easy solo trail, they said. Flash waters. Body recovered 3 days later. But even then, the timeline felt wrong. His text had stopped a day before the storm. His GPS had pinged in a hollow no one ever found. And back then, I hadn't thought to question it. Until now. Because when the laughter started again, this time closer, sharper, it wasn't just anonymous. It was familiar. It was his. I found Hollow Bend just before dawn, a jagged break in the forest that looked more like a scar than a trail, a collapsed shaft ringed by blackened wood and half-buried stones. Someone had once tried to fence it off, probably the mine company, but time had splintered the posts and scattered them like bones. I stepped into the clearing and set the photo down in the center of the ring. Then I lit the flare. The forest responded immediately. A sound like rushing water, then wind, then voices. Layers of them, screaming, crying, laughing. Not loud, not overwhelming, just there, all around, like a memory that refused to fade. I spoke the way Elise told me. I know what you are. I know what you took. You don't belong to me. I unfolded the photo, looked at Luke's smiling face one last time, then I touched it to the flare. The flame took fast, orange curling edges blackening paper, his face turning to ash, and then silence. Not a peaceful silence, a vacuum, like sound itself had been pulled from the air, then a whisper, right behind my left ear. You invited me. I didn't turn. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I remembered what Elise said. Do not acknowledge. Do not feed it. So I said nothing, took one step forward, then another. The voice grew louder. You left him here. I closed my eyes. Another step. He called for you. I kept walking. Then came the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. Luke's voice. Begging. Don't go. Please. I'm cold. I'm still here. You left me. My knees buckled. Tears came hard. My hands shook. But I didn't turn, because some part of me knew that wasn't Luke. That was just his shape, worn like a mask. When I crossed the broken fence line again, the air shifted. The pulsing stopped. The forest stilled. And in that stillness, something let go. I collapsed at the van and cried until my voice broke. That was 9 months ago. Since then, the laughing stopped. The smells are gone. The voices haven't followed me. The van feels like mine again. But here's what you need to understand, something I didn't grasp until it was nearly too late. The Appalachians aren't haunted in the traditional sense. They're not filled with ghosts waiting to scream at you or slam doors. They're filled with memories, old ones, ones that want to be you. And when you bring your grief into these woods, when you walk among these ridges with your hurt, your longing, your guilt, you make yourself a doorway. That's what I was, a door. It wore my brother's voice because it knew I'd follow. It echoed the words I never let myself say, and it nearly won. So, when you're out there camping in the quiet curves of these mountains, when the wind changes and the trees lean just a little too close, listen carefully, but never answer back. Never ask it questions, because if it speaks with the voice of someone you loved, it's already too late. But here's what matters most. I'm still here. I came out the other side. And if you're listening to this, if you're someone who's taken a VW van out into the woods because you needed to find something, you're not alone. I know what it feels like to run from the world and into the trees hoping for clarity and instead finding something you can't explain. But you're not crazy. You're not weak. Fear is human. But letting it define you, that's not the end of your story. I faced the darkest place I've ever known, and I came back whole. So if you ever find yourself in a hollow where the wind speaks in voices you used to trust, don't freeze. Don't run. Don't invite it in. Stand your ground, speak your truth, and walk forward. Because out here on the edge of the map, in the deep green silence of these ridges, the only thing more powerful than what's buried is what you choose to carry out. Drive safe. Watch the tree line. And remember, the woods are listening, but they only answer if you let them. Story 4. I should have known better than to follow an online tip about a free campsite in rural Arizona. The thread said it was once a thriving RV park, now empty but safe. A perfect, quiet place with a view of the desert. I was 3 months into my solo RV trip across the US, and I was trying to save money, so I figured, why not? One night couldn't hurt. I pulled in just before sunset, the tires crunching over gravel bleached pale by years of sun and silence. The sign at the entrance was sun-faded and snapped in half. Sunridge RV Park, barely legible under layers of rust. What remained of the gate hung sideways off its hinge. There were no other campers, no maintenance vehicles, no signs of upkeep, just rows of empty concrete pads, weathered hookups, and a wind that seemed to murmur secrets through cracked windows. Still, I parked the van near the back, where some scrub brush had grown wild along a chain-link fence. I figured I'd get some rest, leave at dawn. The place was eerie, sure, but I've stayed in worse. At least there was a working fire ring and a flat spot for my camp chair. And honestly, there was something peaceful about the isolation. The sun dipped behind the hills, setting everything in a warm, dusty glow. But that night, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt wrong. You ever notice how silence has weight? Like it's not just an absence of noise, but a presence in itself? That's what this was. The kind of quiet that doesn't just settle, it presses in, it makes your skin itch. The desert can be loud with crickets, owls, or coyotes, but here, nothing. Just wind scraping against old metal and the occasional pop of something settling. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks. But then I noticed something that made me sit up in my chair. One of the old RVs, parked 2 rows over, had a light on inside. That shouldn't have been possible. The power hookups were dead. I tested mine when I parked, completely dry. But there it was, a soft orange glow flickering behind a curtain in a unit that looked like it hadn't moved in a decade. The tires were flat, the siding curled like old paint. And yet, light. I told myself, someone else must be camping here. Maybe a drifter or off-grid traveler. I shouted out, "Hey there!" But the sound seemed to get swallowed up. No echo, no response, just that flickering glow. I decided to walk over. I don't know why. I think part of me didn't want to sleep until I made sense of it. I grabbed my flashlight and walked carefully between cracked concrete pads, broken glass crunching underfoot. As I got closer, I could see movement through the curtain. Shadows. Not like someone walking around, more like someone swaying. When I knocked on the RV door, the light went out. Just like that. I stood there a moment, heart thudding. Then I heard it. A slow tapping, not from inside the RV, from behind me. I turned and my light caught something I still can't explain. A second RV, one I would have sworn was empty, had its door slightly open. Not fully, just cranging. Tap, tap, tap. Each time it swung inward, it hit something metal. The rhythm wasn't natural. It was too steady, like it was being pushed. I backed away slowly, the beam of my flashlight bouncing with each step. The wind picked up again, hissing through dead leaves and making the whole place sound like it was breathing. I made it back to my van and locked the doors. I told myself I'd imagined the light, that wind had moved the door, that I was overtired, but I didn't sleep. At 2:17 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. Not animal sounds, not scurrying or skittering. Actual footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking past my van. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped just by the passenger door. Then something tapped the glass. 3 slow taps. I couldn't look. I couldn't move. My body froze, adrenaline pounding. I stayed that way until the sound faded and I heard the footsteps walk off. I counted to 300, then 500. I didn't move all night. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to open the curtain. The lot was empty. The RV with the light, gone. I got out and checked the dust around my van. No footprints. But on the passenger window, smeared into the condensation, was a handprint. Small, like a child's. I don't remember starting the engine. I don't remember pulling onto the road. I just know that I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached a gas station near Flagstaff. I sat there, engine running, until the attendant tapped on the glass and asked if I was okay. I lied, told him I was just tired. But that night changed something in me. Because now, every time I park somewhere new, I check for signs of abandonment, not just broken hookups or cracked pavement, but things most people don't notice. The tilt of an old antenna, a door left just slightly ajar, burn marks near fire pits, and most of all, silence that presses. See, abandoned RV parks don't just die. They linger. They hold on to things, memories, echoes, or maybe something worse. And when they call you in, when they offer you that perfect free spot, they're not being generous. They're hungry. I didn't go back for my camp chair. I didn't even look in the rear view. But that handprint, that child-sized smear on the glass, it didn't fade for 3 days, even in the rain. Absolutely. I'll continue the story in separate sections here in the chat, each around 1,100 to 1,300 words, written as a seamless continuation of the same immersive first-person horror narrative. Here's the next segment. After Flagstaff, I kept driving. I didn't care about the next park or the next destination. I didn't care about gas mileage or the half-packed gear still clanking in the storage bin. I just wanted distance. But distance doesn't always mean safety. The farther I got from Sunridge, the more I tried to rationalize. I told myself it could have been kids, squatters, someone messing around, that the handprint might have been there before. That fear warps memory. But deep down, I knew what I'd felt. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Something in that silence, that steady tapping, it didn't feel new. It felt remembered. Like I'd heard it before. 3 days later, I was parked at a well-reviewed site in Utah. This place wasn't abandoned. Full hookups, friendly camp host, even Wi-Fi and coffee in the main lodge. It should have felt safe. Should have. But I couldn't sleep. Every shadow stretched wrong. Every bump in the night triggered that fight or flight. And worse, I started having dreams. Or maybe they weren't dreams. It started small. The faint sound of a swing creaking in the distance, even though there were no kids around. Then a whisper I couldn't quite catch. Not words, just a feeling. Sadness, hunger, loneliness. That last one hit me the hardest, because the loneliness wasn't mine. It was someone else's, something else's. And every time I jolt awake, my van would feel different. Like something had moved, not stolen, not broken, just shifted. My flashlight would be under the seat instead of in the glove box. My socks damp, sitting on the counter. My backup keys hanging slightly out of the ignition. That's when I stopped sleeping altogether. I told myself I needed to reset. Clear my head. So I drove north into Colorado, looking for a mountain site I'd visited once years ago with my brother. It wasn't listed online, just a spot off a fire road past Durango, a hidden gem, or it used to be. When I finally found it, my heart dropped. It was gone. Not in the way you think. The road was still there, the trees, the trailhead, but the clearing where we'd once pitched tents and cooked canned beans, Bulldozed. Now a wide, flat grid of cement pads, electric boxes rusting in place, a playground half built and overgrown, a new RV park. Started, then abandoned. No name, no signs, just the echo of something started and never finished. I should have turned around right then, but something told me not to. Not out of curiosity, more like guilt, like I owed it to my brother. So I parked in the far corner next to a drainage ditch where we'd once caught frogs as kids. I shut the engine off and sat, just listened, and there it was again. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the pressing kind, the kind that leans in when you're alone. But this time it wasn't just the silence. It was the cold, a kind of cold that doesn't make sense in summer. The sun had been out all day, yet my breath fogged in the air like it was late November. I checked the thermostat, 72 inside the van, but outside, I couldn't say. My fingertips ached just cracking the window. I left the van only once that night, to pee behind a tree. That's when I saw it. Something moved across the pads. Not a person, not an animal, a shadow. It didn't walk, it glided, long, low, and slow. It passed behind one of the unfinished utility posts and didn't reappear, just vanished, like it slid into the concrete and was swallowed whole. I didn't sleep, again. But this time, it wasn't footsteps or tapping that kept me up. It was the sound of the swing again, except now it was closer. I hadn't even noticed a swing set before. But there it was in the morning. One rusted metal frame with a single black rubber seat hanging crooked, covered in frost. My brother used to push me on a swing like that. Same kind of rubber seat, same sound. That's when I remembered something I'd forgotten for years. The last time we were in that forest, I wandered off during a hike. I couldn't have been more than 8, got turned around, separated. I remember sitting on a rock, crying until my brother found me hours later. But that's not the whole story. What I didn't remember until now was the woman. She sat on a log across from me, silent, watching. Pale face, long dark hair, black dress, she never spoke, just stared. Her presence made the air feel cold. I didn't tell anyone. I thought she was a hallucination, or a memory that didn't matter, but she was real, and now she was back. That frost on the swing, it hadn't melted by noon. I packed and left. Fast, no breakfast, no photos, just drove straight until I hit pavement again. I passed a park ranger station and nearly crashed trying to pull in. I asked if anyone had ever reported strange happenings near that old development up in the hills. He gave me a look I won't forget, a slow nod. "You saw the swing, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He just said, "That place should have never been touched. Locals warned the developer. Ground was sour, lots of stories, missing kids, crying sounds, lights at night. Some say it's the land, others say it's what was left there. But no one stays more than a night." I asked if anyone had died there. He hesitated, then said, "Not officially." I kept driving, and I realized something else along the way. These places, abandoned RV parks, they're not just forgotten pieces of land. They're traps, waiting for people like me, people chasing quiet, isolation, peace. But peace doesn't live where memory decays. It festers, it feeds, and once you park, it remembers you. I didn't go far after that, just a small town campground off a riverbank west of Pueblo. I didn't even unhook the battery or set up the awning. Just parked, crawled into the back, and sat there in silence until night fell. I kept telling myself it was over, that leaving the mountains had ended it. But I knew better, because fear like that doesn't come from outside. It finds something inside you first, and I'd given it everything it needed. That night I dreamt of the woman again, only this time it wasn't from childhood. She was standing right outside my van window, staring in. Her face pale as chalk, but her eyes, God, her eyes, looked swollen with tears. Not fresh ones, old ones. The kind you've been holding back for years. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Just stared. I woke up with a jolt, my heart pounding like I'd been sprinting. I reached for my phone to check the time, 3:11 a.m., and that's when I noticed the window. It was open. Just a crack. I never leave the windows open at night, not in town, not in the wild. It's automatic, habitual. I stared at the opening for what felt like an hour, waiting for something to reach in. Nothing did. But when I closed it, I realized something was missing. My keychain. Little silver compass. It was always clipped on the curtain rail above the stove. It was gone. I searched everywhere, every drawer, under every seat. Nothing. Then I checked outside and found it, sitting upright on the picnic table, facing the river. That's when the dam broke. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat on the cold metal bench and held that keychain in my hand, trying to figure out how it got there, trying to convince myself I left it, that I dropped it, that I was tired or distracted or slipping. But I wasn't. I was just being watched, not in the way you notice someone in a crowd, in the way prey senses the predator's breath before it feels the teeth. That campground was full, every slot booked, but I felt more alone there than I had in the mountains. The laughter of kids in nearby campers didn't reach me. The smell of propane grills and morning coffee barely registered. All I could think about was that woman, not just who she was, but why she was following me. I spent the next day driving in loops through the back roads, hoping movement would keep the fear from settling too deep. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt haunted, not just by her, by every decision that had led me here. There's a loneliness that comes with RV living no one talks about. Sure, they show you the sunsets, the cozy fires, the open roads, but not the long stretches where you don't speak to anyone for days, where silence becomes a language you start to understand, and sometimes it talks back. I thought about quitting, selling the van, moving home, getting a job at some desk where nothing ever changes, but something in me refused. Not pride, not stubbornness. It was fear of returning, of going backward. So instead of running from it, I decided to face it. To go back to the place where it started. Sunridge. I don't know why. Maybe it was the only way to break whatever this was. Maybe I needed to know if it was real, or if I was losing my mind in the endless echo chamber of the road. It took me 4 days to work up the nerve. I camped in populated places, near families, always kept the lights on. I left the van running some nights, just in case. But when I arrived at the turnoff to Sunridge, everything inside me went cold again. The gravel road was exactly as I remembered, rutted, narrow, flanked by dark pines leaning in just slightly too far, like they wanted to whisper something or block something in. The gate was still open. The plastic sign still swung, cracked in half. I pulled in slowly, and there it was, the lot I'd parked in, the broken fence, the bathhouse door still hanging open. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was another RV, smaller than mine. Beige and rust-streaked like it hadn't moved in years. Parked crooked, no license plate. I circled once, then parked across the lot, killed the engine, listened. Nothing, not even birdsong. I waited. Minutes passed. Then I saw it. Movement in the window. A figure, just standing, watching me. I got out, cautious but calm, and walked toward the RV. I told myself I'd knock, introduce myself, say I was just passing through, anything to make it feel normal. But as I got closer, I realized something chilling. The window was broken, shards of glass on the dirt, and no screen behind it. Whoever had been standing there wasn't inside. I turned around, and there she was, 10 feet behind me, the woman. Same black dress, same expressionless face, same cold eyes. I couldn't move, not out of fear, out of paralysis. Like gravity itself had decided I wasn't allowed to leave. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just lifted one hand and pointed behind me, back toward my van. I turned slowly, every muscle locked in tension, and saw the door, wide open, even though I knew I had locked it. The inside light was on, and someone was standing inside. I took a step back, but the air behind me felt like ice pressing against my spine. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't look at her again. I just focused on my van, on the shape inside it. The silhouette was human, still, just standing there as if inspecting something, like it had all the time in the world. I moved closer. The figure didn't react. The light cast shadows across the cabinets, and for a moment I hoped it was a trick of the light, that the movement I'd seen earlier had all been in my head, that maybe someone was parked nearby and wandered too close, that this was all some elaborate accident of coincidence and nerves. But then it shifted, turned its head toward me, and I saw its face. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't anyone I recognized, but it also wasn't alive. Its skin looked gray, stretched too tight. The eyes weren't cloudy, they were empty. Not blind, not glazed, just hollow, like there was nothing behind them at all. I don't know how long I stood there staring, maybe seconds, maybe longer. Then the figure stepped backward into the shadows and was gone. Not out the back door, not under the bed, just gone. I rushed forward, breath caught in my throat, and climbed into the van with my flashlight shaking in my hand. Nothing. Every cabinet opened, every corner searched, under the bed, behind the fridge, even the storage hatch under the floor. Nothing. But there was one thing that hadn't been there before. On my pillow dead center sat a folded piece of paper. I didn't want to open it. I knew whatever was inside would change things, like I'd crossed some line, and this was the moment it all became real. But I unfolded it anyway. 3 words. You left her. That's all it said. My hands trembled, my vision tunneled. I couldn't breathe, not from panic, from recognition, because deep down I knew exactly what it meant. When I was 12, my younger sister drowned in a lake near our grandfather's property in Idaho. We were camping for the summer. The lake was shallow, calm. Our parents were inside making dinner. I was supposed to be watching her, but I wasn't. I'd gone to skip rocks. Just for a minute. By the time I turned around, she was gone. No splashing, no scream, just gone. Her body was found the next morning, face down in the reeds. I never forgave myself, never talked about it again, never visited that lake until a year ago, right before I started this trip. I went back for the first time, parked my van at the old lot beside the water, and just sat there all night. I never told anyone, but now somehow something new, something wanted me to remember, to relive it, and to suffer for it. That night, I drove without direction. I didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't even think. I just drove until the sun rose behind me and I was far from that cursed place. But you can't outrun memory, and you can't escape a truth that wants to be seen. The next 2 days were a blur. Small towns, gas station coffee, rest stops. I kept to daylight, slept with the engine running. Every shadow became a threat, every sound a trigger. And then, in the middle of nowhere, I found it, an abandoned RV park, not listed on any app, no signage, just a hand-painted arrow nailed to a tree. Camp here. I should have kept driving, but something pulled me in. I turned down the overgrown path. The gravel was cracked, grass sprouting through. The trees felt close, like they'd grown up around this place and swallowed it whole. And there it was. A rusted sign half fallen that read Sunset Hollow Family Campground. Only there were no families, no playground, no laughter, just empty, decaying RVs parked like they'd been left in a hurry. Some still had chairs out front, blankets inside. One even had a kettle on the stove, but no people. I walked carefully, alert. Every step felt like trespass. Every breath echoed. And then I saw it. A photo taped to the window of the last RV in the row. I moved closer and froze. It was my sister. Same dress she wore that day at the lake, same missing front tooth, same smile. The photo was aged, water damaged, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had been watching me long before I arrived here, and they wanted me to remember, to feel the weight of what I'd buried. I staggered back, heart in my throat. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Ragged. Right behind me. Why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you come sooner? I turned around fast, light trembling in my hand. Nothing was there. Just trees. Just wind. But it wasn't wind. Not really. The air wasn't moving. The branches didn't sway. Still, I heard it again. Closer now. You left her alone. It was the same voice, same whispery rasp, like breath strained through wet leaves. Not angry, not accusatory, just disappointed. I backed toward the van. Every instinct told me to leave, to run. But the door wouldn't open. I yanked harder, locked, even though I'd never locked it, even though I never do. Behind me, the ground crunched, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I didn't look, I couldn't. Instead, I dropped to the gravel and slid under the van. Heart hammering, breath shallow, and I saw feet, bare, pale, muddy. They walked up to the van, stopped right in front of the driver's door. Then a hand reached down, touched the handle, clicked it open. The door creaked. I could hear someone climbing inside, the rustle of fabric, the sound of them settling into the driver's seat like they belonged there. I closed my eyes, waited for the engine. Nothing, just stillness. Then a smell, faint but unmistakable. Algae, pond water, decay. I opened my eyes again. The feet were gone. So was the figure. So was the sound. I scrambled out from under the van, flung the door open. Empty. Cabin clean. Keys untouched. But something had changed. On the passenger seat, a small stuffed bear sat propped up, faded pink, one button eye missing. It was hers. I hadn't seen it since that summer, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I fell into the seat, clutching the wheel, trying to hold it together, but inside, everything was breaking loose. The years of trying to forget, the nights of pretending it was just a tragedy, not a mistake. It was all cracking open. I wasn't being haunted by some random spirit. This was personal. It knew me. It knew what I'd buried, and it wanted me to remember. I drove until dusk, the bear still sitting silently beside me. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Couldn't even touch it again. The road twisted, narrowed, grew darker. Pines leaned in close. Fog began to crawl across the pavement in threads. Then I saw it. Another sign. Wood. Fresh paint. No exit. Just those two words. I slammed on the brakes, looked around. No other cars, no sound, no buildings, no indication of where I'd come from or where I was going. But the forest had changed. Somehow it felt tighter, like it had closed behind me. I put the van in reverse, backed up a mile, then two. No intersections, no crossroad, just that same no exit sign, now standing on the other side of the road, facing me again. I was trapped, and I hadn't even seen it happen. Something about that RV park had followed me, or maybe it never let me leave in the first place. I found a small clearing just wide enough to pull off, killed the engine, locked every door, every window, every latch, and I waited. The silence felt deliberate, like it was baiting me to listen harder. A laugh. Quiet. Childlike. Drifting through the trees. I didn't want to move. But I opened the window a crack, and that's when I heard the second sound. Not laughter. Weeping. A child sobbing somewhere in the dark. Calling for help. Calling for me. My hands shook. My throat tightened because it wasn't just any child. It was her. Her voice. I recognized it like a knife to the gut. Don't leave me again. I was out of the van before I could stop myself. Moving into the trees. No flashlight, just instinct. The forest floor was soft, wet. With every step, I sank deeper into it. Pine needles, old leaves, and something else. Something that clung to my boots. It smelled like the lake. The crying grew louder, more frantic. Then it stopped. All at once. And I was standing in a clearing I hadn't seen before. Fog hovered low, swirling like it was thinking. And in the center, surrounded by broken glass jars, was a single wooden bench. And sitting on that bench was a child. Her back to me. Shoulders shaking, same dress, same hair. I stepped forward. She didn't turn. Emily? My voice cracked. The girl froze. Then she slowly turned around, but it wasn't her. The face was wrong. Too pale, too smooth. No eyelids, just wide, glassy eyes, like a doll that had been left in the rain too long. Her lips didn't move, but I heard her voice again. You weren't supposed to forget. Then the ground opened beneath me. I was falling. I came to choking on cold water, lungs heaving like I'd been underwater for hours. My hands gripped thick, mossy roots as I dragged myself up out of the pit. Mud clung to my arms, soaked through my shirt, and my legs trembled with every motion. But worse than the cold, worse than the pain, was the silence. Nothing stirred in the trees above. No birds, no insects, just the thick, breathless hush of the forest watching me. I staggered out into another clearing, this one filled with RVs, abandoned, sunken halfway into the soft earth, some covered in vines, some with their doors swinging open like mouths left gasping. I didn't remember walking here, didn't remember getting here, but it was the same place. That same forgotten RV park I thought I'd left behind. Except now, it wasn't empty. Figures moved between the wrecks, shapes more felt than seen. Human silhouettes, but not alive. Faces warped like they were smeared in water. They walked without sound, turned corners without bending, flickered in and out of focus like light through fogged glass. And they all looked sad, not angry, not violent, just mournful, like they had nowhere left to go and they'd accepted it. That's when I realized this wasn't a haunting. This wasn't revenge. This was a graveyard, a forgotten one. And I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I'd crossed some invisible line. I tried to turn around, to walk back the way I'd come. But the path was gone. The trees had shifted, like they were hiding the exit on purpose. I moved quickly between the old RVs, trying to retrace steps that no longer existed. One had its awning still extended, flapping in the breeze like a torn sail. Another had "Leave" scratched into the side in deep gouges. The door of one swung open as I passed, and I swear I saw someone inside, just sitting there, still, watching, not blinking, just waiting. I didn't stop, couldn't. My hands burned from grabbing tree limbs and scraping past rusted metal. My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. It wasn't just panic anymore. It was something else, something deeper, like guilt made physical. Because deep down I knew this place hadn't pulled me in randomly. It had chosen me. And I knew why. I'd buried it too long, buried her. And in doing so, I'd buried part of myself too. I stumbled into a small open patch where the earth was flat and dry. A campfire pit sat at the center, long unused, the stones blackened with age. I collapsed beside it, breathing hard. Then I saw them. 3 photos, laid carefully on the ground in front of the pit, all old, faded. In each one, I was there, smiling, next to my wife, next to Emily. Our last trip together before the accident. I picked one up and my fingers trembled. My thumb brushed the corner and I remembered that day clearly. The smell of pine, the s'mores we burned, the story she told about a ghost in the fire. Back then, it had been just a joke. Now it was a warning I'd ignored. A twig snapped behind me. I turned slowly. And there she was, Emily. But not like the thing I saw in the clearing. This time, it was really her. Face the same as I remembered. Eyes wide, not with fear, but recognition and disappointment. Daddy. The word hit me harder than anything. My throat clenched. I tried to speak, but the guilt was thick in my mouth. I'm so sorry, I finally whispered. She didn't smile, didn't blink. You forgot me. I shook my head, tears slipping down my face. No, I tried to move on. I didn't forget. You never came back. That broke me, because it was true. After the accident, I couldn't face the park, couldn't face anything. I'd sold the trailer, stopped traveling, tried to bury every piece of her, photos, toys, even her voice. I ran from my grief like it was something shameful, and now it had chased me here. Are you gone? I asked, voice cracking. She tilted her head. Not all the way, not yet. I reached out, but she stepped back. You have to tell the truth, she said. You have to remember what really happened. I felt the ground shift beneath me again. Not physically, but something inside. Memories I'd blocked. Details I'd twisted to protect myself. She hadn't wandered off like I'd told everyone. She hadn't been unsupervised. I'd left her, just for a minute, to get firewood, to take a call. I didn't remember exactly why, but I'd chosen to turn away. And by the time I came back, she was gone, taken by the lake, slipped under without a sound. I sank to my knees, sobbing into my hands. The truth cut deeper than any ghost, but she was still there. And for a moment, she smiled. And then the forest changed. The fog thinned, the shadows faded, the air warmed, and a path opened up behind her. Back to my van, back to the road, back to now. But as I stood to follow it, I looked around one last time. The RVs were gone. The clearing was gone. Just trees, birds, a breeze, and on the edge of a tree branch fluttering in the wind, the small pink bear swayed gently, hooked by one paw, like she'd left it for me to find again. I walked back to the van in silence. The road out had returned. The GPS worked again. The world had moved on. But I hadn't. Not fully. And maybe that's okay, because some places never leave you. And some truths must be faced alone in the quietest parts of the country, where maps end and memory begins. Story 5. They always say nature has rules, unspoken, ancient ones. and that if you don't respect them, it will teach you in its own violent way. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the lesson isn't loud. Sometimes it's so quiet, so subtle, that by the time you realize you're the one being watched, it's already too late. My name is Darren Cole, 42 years old, a welder by trade and an RV camper by obsession. Born in Colorado Springs, but spent most of my adult life chasing solitude across the wide-open veins of America's backroads. I wasn't looking for anything when I set out that spring morning. Just peace. Just the kind of silence you can't find unless your nearest neighbor is a coyote and your only light at night is a dying fire. I wasn't running from anything either. At least I didn't think I was. Not until that trip. Not until the rules broke. It started in central Montana, Big Sky country. There's a campground up near the Highwood Mountains that I stumbled on through an old friend who swore by it. Said it was one of the last real spots. No hookups, no cell service, no noise but the wind and the trees. I figured a week up there might just clear out the last few cobwebs from my winter hibernation. I arrived late afternoon. The road in was rough, the kind of washboard dirt path that shakes every screw loose in your rig. My old VW camper van was up to the challenge, but I could feel every bone in my back by the time I pulled into a clearing surrounded by thick pine. There were no signs, no markers, just a fire ring, some flattened grass, and a sky so wide it made you feel like a dot on a map you couldn't read. And that's where I met Ron and Emily. They were parked just down the hill in a beat-up Airstream, vintage and clearly lived in. He looked about 60, wiry and tan, with those deep sun cracks around his eyes you only get from living outside. She was younger, maybe late 40s, with a quiet way about her. We traded pleasantries. They were from Idaho, they said. Came out to this spot every year to watch the migration. Elk, mostly, Ron told me, but you get some strange ones, too. I didn't ask what he meant. I wish I had. That first night was peaceful. I made a small fire, grilled some sausage, watched the sky go from gold to navy. The temperature dropped fast, though, and the wind moved in like it had a purpose. Around midnight, I zipped into my sleeping bag and shut my eyes to the sound of wind combing through pine. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp taps. Not on the van, but close, maybe 10 feet away. Wood on wood, or something close to it. I sat up. Then again, 3 taps. Then silence. I told myself it was a branch or a deer rubbing its antlers. Nothing worth getting worked up about. I didn't even get out of the bag. I just lay there, heart ticking a little faster, and waited for sleep to swallow me. Morning came, cold and gray. I made coffee and wandered around my site. Found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, just that creeping sense that something had tested the edge of my presence. By the 3rd day, I started noticing the smells. It wasn't rot exactly, more like damp fur and copper. Like an animal had died nearby but hadn't fully given itself over to decay. It hung low in the air when the wind dropped. Sometimes I caught it near the edge of the trees, and once right outside the van's passenger door. I asked Ron if they noticed it. He just nodded. Said, "They're back early this year." "Who?" He didn't answer. Just looked toward the trees like he was trying to see something that wasn't there. Emily told me not to worry later that night when Ron had gone off to collect firewood. She said sometimes the predators follow the herds down early. Sometimes the land remembers violence and echoes it for a while. She didn't smile when she said that. I started locking the van at night. A silly thing, maybe, out in the wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling, like the ground itself was leaning closer to hear me breathe. On the 5th night, I woke to the sound of something brushing along the outside of the van. Not scratching, not banging, just a slow, deliberate drag of something against the metal. Like fingers. I froze. My breath caught in my throat and refused to leave. Then it stopped. I waited for a full 10 minutes before unzipping the bag and grabbing the flashlight. I counted to 3. Opened the door. Nothing. Just trees and dark and silence. But in the soft dirt beneath my door, I found prints. Long, narrow prints. Like hooves, but not exactly. They were too elongated. and there were drag marks between them, like whatever it was walked wrong, or it was carrying something heavy. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Ron. The next morning, I told them I was thinking of leaving. Ron looked at me with something close to pity, said, "You can leave, sure, but that doesn't mean it lets go." I packed up anyway, but as I rolled out of the clearing just past the tree line, I saw it, just for a second. It stood between two trees, almost perfectly still, tall, covered in dark fur. But its face looked too human, like someone had peeled skin over a wolf's skull and called it good enough. Its eyes followed the van, just watched. No aggression, no fear. I didn't stop, I didn't look back. I drove for 6 hours straight, didn't even stop to eat. By the time I hit the outskirts of Great Falls, I felt like I'd been underwater all week. But that smell followed me. And the next night, when I parked in a legitimate campground with full hookups and friendly retirees, I heard 3 sharp knocks on the rear panel of my van. And I knew then, Ron was right. Some things follow you. Some wildlife doesn't belong in any guidebook. Some rules, once broken, never reset. And in the silence between knock and echo, I began to understand why. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid there, staring at the ceiling of my van, every nerve in my body tuned to the silence. The kind of silence that feels staged. Not natural, but forced. Like something was holding its breath along with me. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. That whatever I'd seen back in the highwoods, if I saw anything, was just a hungry bear. A trick of the light, my brain making monsters out of shadows. But that smell of wet fur and old blood had no imagination. It was real. It was on my jacket, in my sheets. I could taste it on the back of my tongue when I inhaled. I tried to brush it off. In the morning, I even forced small talk with a retired couple from Indiana parked next to me. They were kind, talked about grandkids and garden tomatoes and how much they loved the freedom of the road. I smiled, I nodded, but I couldn't get my hands to stop shaking when I poured my coffee. The campground had all the comforts I should have wanted. Running water, flush toilets, even a little general store with propane and ice cream sandwiches. I should have felt safe, but I didn't. I felt watched. Every time I turned, I half expected to see something tall and silent standing just beyond the edge of my vision. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up and left. No goodbyes. Just a nervous wave through the window as I rolled out, headed southeast, trying to outrun the thing I wouldn't admit I believed in. I drove for hours, through Billings, past the Custer National Forest, and all the way into the Badlands of North Dakota. It was stupid, reckless even. I didn't have a plan, no reservation, no real reason to keep moving, except the growing conviction that staying still would invite something I didn't want to face. I ended up in a primitive campsite just off a gravel service road, not far from Theodore Roosevelt National Park. There were a few other rigs there, spaced out wide, each tucked into its own little cut of land. It was late, but not dark yet. The sun was still bleeding out over the jagged horizon, and the air was dry and heavy with the scent of sagebrush. It felt better. Not safe, but distant. Detached from whatever had been pressing in on me back in Montana. I set up, made a quick meal, and let myself believe for just a little while that maybe it was over. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. That night, the air stayed warm. I left the van's rear window cracked and dozed off listening to the soft hum of the wind playing with the brittle grass, and then the scratching began. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost delicate, like something testing the metal with one careful claw. I held my breath. There it was again. A slow, dragging scrape across the back door. Then a pause. Then 2 soft knocks. Not 3, 2. And that terrified me more than anything, because it meant something had changed. Something was experimenting, testing. I grabbed the flashlight and the knife I kept wedged between the cushions. I didn't open the door this time. I sat there unmoving, staring at the exit like a trapped animal. And then laughter, high-pitched, distant, somewhere out in the dark. At first, I thought it might be another camper, maybe a group of kids fooling around, but the sound was wrong, too shrill, too sharp. like someone trying to mimic the sound of laughter without understanding what joy is. It was laughter without soul, and it wasn't alone. A second voice joined it, then a third, all different pitches, but all wrong in the same way. Too perfect, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. The sound moved through the night like fog, circling, drawing closer, then vanishing again. And underneath it all was the smell, that same damp coppery musk that clung to my gear days ago, that smell that seemed to sink into everything it touched. It slid in under the cracked window like smoke, wrapped around me, soaked my lungs. I snapped the window shut. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally rose, I stepped out into the light and scanned the van. No scratches, no prints, no sign of anything. But every piece of gear I had set outside overnight, my folding chair, water jug, my firewood, was gone. Not stolen, just gone, like it had never been there at all. I stood there, blinking into the morning sun, unsure whether I should scream or laugh or just get the hell out of there. Nothing made sense. My water jug was too heavy to carry far. It couldn't have rolled off. There was no incline. And even if animals had dragged something, why would they take the chair? The firewood? Why everything? The tracks around my van were wrong, too. At first, I thought there were none, but when I looked closer, the dust had been disturbed, just not the way you'd expect from a raccoon or a coyote. The ground was swept clean in a perfect half circle around my van. Not scattered, not chaotic. Swept, like someone had used a branch to erase their presence. Or someone, or something, was trying to make it look like nothing had happened. I got back in the van and slammed the lock down with more force than I meant to. That whole day, I drove without stopping. Didn't eat, didn't pee, didn't speak. The world outside the windshield became a blur of gray, like the Badlands had stripped the color from everything. And all I could think about was that sound. Those two soft knocks. The laughter that followed. By the time I crossed into South Dakota, my hands were cramping from how hard I was gripping the wheel. I ended up pulling into a little BLM campground just outside of the Black Hills. It was one of those pull-through loops surrounded by dense pine and silence so thick it made your ears ring. No hookups, no ranger station, just an old, faded sign at the entrance and maybe two other campers scattered far away enough to pretend they didn't exist. I parked near a stream, cracked the windows again just a little, and forced myself to eat something cold out of the fridge. I told myself I was done being scared. That paranoia feeds itself like wildfire, and if I didn't break the cycle, I was going to unravel. But as the sun dipped low behind the trees, that pressure came back. You ever feel that shift in the woods when the light starts dying and everything, birds, squirrels, even the wind just stops? That's what it was like. As if the forest was holding its breath again, listening for something I couldn't hear. And this time, I didn't even need to see it. I could feel it. There's a weight certain predators carry with them, something primal that sets your nerves screaming before your brain even catches up. I'd only ever felt it once before, walking too close to a mountain lion trail near Zion. But this was worse. This wasn't just threat. This was intent. Predatory interest. That night, I barely slept. I left the lights on inside, kept the knife in one hand, the flashlight in the other. And sometime around 3 a.m. I heard it again. Not outside the van. Inside. A breath. Not mine. Slow, ragged, like someone or something had been holding it for far too long and finally let it go. It came from behind the cabinet door beneath the sink. I froze. Every hair on my neck stood on end. I hadn't opened that cabinet since I stocked it back in Wyoming. I knew exactly what was in there. Paper towels, matches, and a sealed container of dried beans. No vents. No way in. And yet, there it was again. Breathing. Soft. Shuddering. Like it was learning how. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, staring at the cabinet, every part of me screaming to run, to open the door and end it, to drive, to scream, to deny that any of this was real. And then the cabinet creaked. Not a full swing, just a whisper of motion. It moved like it was breathing too. That's when the flashlight flickered. then cut out completely. And in the dark, I swear I heard it whisper something, one word or maybe just a sound that sounded like my name, but stretched and twisted like it had never been meant for a human mouth. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just sat there, paralyzed, shaking, waiting for morning. And when it came, nothing was there. The cabinet was closed, the light worked, everything was in its place. Except me. I was no longer in the same state of mind I'd been in when I first left home. The road wasn't freedom anymore. It was something else, something I wasn't sure I could survive. I told myself the same lies people always tell when they're too deep in it to crawl back out. But I still checked the cabinet a dozen times that morning, emptied it out, shined my flashlight into every corner. Nothing. No holes, no signs of entry, no mold, no odd smells, nothing that should explain the breath I heard or that voice. I thought about leaving the van behind, about walking into the woods until I hit a road and hitchhiking home, but that felt just as crazy. So I did what scared people do when they don't know what else to do. I moved again. I headed east, told myself the Black Hills had their ghosts and I'd crossed into them. But the land would change, the air would lift, the road would bring me back to myself. But I was wrong. The road didn't lead away from the nightmare. It only took me deeper. I ended up outside a tiny town in Nebraska. Not even a town, really. Just a gas station, a grain silo, and a small RV campground tucked behind a barbed wire fence. It was called Whispering Willows. That name should have been my first clue. The campground was maybe 6 gravel spots around a stagnant pond, a few picnic tables with sun-bleached umbrellas. No people, no host, just a black mailbox nailed to a post where you dropped your $10 bill in an envelope and hoped you wouldn't be towed for the night. It was the only option for hours. I parked in the corner near the pond. The water was green with algae. Dragonflies skimmed the surface like they were skating on glass. The trees here weren't dense, but they were wrong. Thin willows that bent toward the water, each branch hanging like ropes, swaying even when there was no wind. And again, that feeling settled into my chest like a rock in my lungs. It was quiet, too quiet, even for Nebraska. At sunset, I saw the first one. I thought it was an animal at first, a deer, maybe. But when I looked again, I realized it wasn't moving like any animal I knew. It stood between the willows, just beyond the pond, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Its shape was off, too tall, shoulders too narrow, and it was hunched slightly, like its spine had too many vertebrae. I could barely see its face, but what I could make out looked stretched like wet cloth pulled too tight. I blinked. It was gone. I waited, frozen, for it to come back. But it didn't. Not that night. Instead, the sound returned. This time it was whistling. Just 3 notes. Low, high, low. I checked every window, every door. Nothing. But then I noticed something odd. The wind was still blowing the willows in the wrong direction. Every other tree bent west, away from the pond. But the one nearest my van, it swayed east, as if pulled by something under the water. I couldn't sleep. I sat up, back against the driver's seat, eyes on the pond, waiting for the shape to return. It didn't. But something else did. At 2:13 a.m. exactly, the pond began to ripple. There was no rain, no fish, no movement in the air, but the surface broke, softly at first, just a circle expanding outward like a dropped pebble had struck dead center. Then another, until the entire pond seemed to boil with movement, and out from the water came the same 3-note whistle. Low, high, low. This time, closer. And then, I swear to God, I heard something drag itself out of the water. I didn't look. Couldn't. My body locked. My mind screamed not to move, that if I pretended to be asleep, it might pass me by. But in the reflection of my side mirror, I saw it. A figure. Tall. Unsteady. Almost like it was learning how to stand. Its limbs were long. Too long. Its fingers touched the ground like a marionette with broken strings. It moved toward my van, slow at first, then faster. I ducked, covered my head, waited for the sound of a hand on the door. Nothing. Just silence. And then, that same low breath, right outside my driver's side window. Shuddering. Inhuman, but not unfamiliar. It matched the breath from the cabinet. And somehow, I knew it had followed me. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like hours. Every instinct told me not to move, not to breathe. I could feel the presence outside, its breath steaming lightly on the glass, fogging the edge of the window, but never pressing against it. It didn't need to see me. It already knew I was there. It had always known. At some point, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 2 hours, the breath stopped. I waited even longer. I counted to 103 different times before I finally found the courage to peek up. The window was clear. The pond was still. Whatever had come out of it was gone. But the gravel beneath my van had a trail, a wet, dragging smear, like something had crawled its way around the RV. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sun finally crept over the trees, I threw open the van door and walked the full loop of the campground, searching for anything. Footprints, a body, some sign that I'd imagined it all. There was nothing but that single drag mark. It started at the water's edge and ended beneath my van. I nearly left then. Should have. But I told myself I'd been sleep deprived. That grief does weird things to your mind, that I just needed a hot coffee and a real meal. So I drove into the nearest town, a faded little community with a population sign that looked like someone had scratched the number down with a key. I stopped at a diner with one truck out front and a crooked open sign in the window. The waitress didn't blink when I asked for black coffee and eggs, but when I mentioned where I'd camped, her hand stopped halfway to the carafe. "You were out by the willows?" she asked. I nodded. She glanced out the window. "Nobody stays there anymore." "Why not?" She looked back at me. "You seen anything strange?" I hesitated. "Like what?" She leaned in just slightly. "Like something coming up from the pond." My mouth went dry. I didn't answer. She nodded like she already knew. "It started in the 90s, she said. "After the floods, people said the water table rose too fast, that something got stirred up in the soil. Old chemicals, maybe, or older bones." "Bones?" she shrugged. "Or maybe just stories. All I know is animals stopped drinking from that pond, kids stopped playing in those trees, and the few folks who stayed out there overnight." She let the sentence hang. "Did something happen to that?" She nodded again. "One man came back screaming about faces in the water. Another was found 2 towns over, still inside his RV, but his brain was gone. Not like trauma, like it had dissolved." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Instead, I asked the only thing I could think to ask. "What people call it?" She stared out the window again. "They don't." That night, I didn't go back to Whispering Willows. I couldn't. I drove another 100 miles east and found a proper KOA just off the interstate. Bright lights. Barbecue pit. Other campers with their kids and dogs. Normal. I parked near the center and slept with the windows open, hoping the air would wash away what had followed me. It didn't. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound I now feared more than anything in this world. Low, high, low. The whistle. I shot upright and slammed the windows shut. Peeked out into the night. There were people nearby, other campers, but they weren't moving. Worse, they were all facing the same direction. Toward my RV. Every one of them. Some stood in pajamas, others barefoot in the gravel, eyes wide open but unblinking, and not one of them spoke. It wasn't them. I could feel it. It was it, using them like puppets. One of the campers took a step forward and opened her mouth. But what came out wasn't her voice. It was mine. That whisper I'd heard in the cabinet. That breath. "I see you now." I slammed the blinds shut and stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the coffee pot I had forgotten to unplug. My chest was heaving like I just sprinted uphill. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to get out. Leave everything behind. Just drive. But I couldn't, not with those people standing there, their bodies still, eyes vacant, and that voice, my voice, coming out of that woman's mouth. How was that even possible? I didn't dare open the door. No, I didn't even breathe. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward the rear of the RV, reaching under the bunk for my emergency toolkit. I kept a flare gun in there, mostly for bears, but right now it was the only thing between me and something I didn't understand. The moment I touched the cold metal, the whisper stopped. Dead silence. No whistling. No shuffling feet. Not even the buzz of a nearby insect. I peeked through the edge of the rear blind. They were gone, all of them. No campers, no kids, not a single person in sight. Picnic tables still had drinks left on them. A radio near one of the rigs still buzzed faintly, its battery not yet dead. But the people vanished. I grabbed my keys, started the van, and peeled out of the campground. Gravel skidded out beneath my tires, and my back end fishtailed once before I corrected. I didn't care. I didn't care that it was nearly dawn or that I hadn't even brushed my teeth. I just drove. I didn't stop for hours, didn't eat, didn't talk to anyone, didn't even turn on the radio. The silence felt safer. Eventually, I found myself deep in national forest land, high elevation, no cell service, just miles of winding roads surrounded by pine and snowmelt creeks. I told myself I was looking for somewhere remote, somewhere that thing couldn't find me. But in truth, I think I was trying to outrun my own reflection, that voice, because if it could mimic me, what else could it take? By nightfall, I pulled into a pull-off by an old fire road. No campsites, no other RVs, not even a fire ring, just a flat patch of dirt and the distant sound of rushing water. For the first time in 3 days, I let the engine go cold and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no whispering, no unnatural breathing fogging my windows. I heated up a can of chili, sat on the fold-out step, and tried to enjoy the night air. For a moment, I felt like maybe I was free. Maybe whatever it was, it needed something. Water, people, attention to follow. Maybe in the deepest parts of the forest, it couldn't breathe. That night, I slept. And for the first few hours, I didn't dream. But just after midnight, something woke me. A cold draft, curling through the RV like fingers made of fog. I sat up, listened. Nothing. I checked the windows, still locked, still sealed. But when I turned toward the sink, I saw it. A single drop of water, falling from the faucet. Drip, drip, drip. I hadn't used the sink all day. My heart started to pound. I opened the cabinet beneath, half expecting to find a leak in the line, but the space was bone dry. Then I saw it. The water wasn't dripping from the faucet. It was condensing on it, like breath, like something inside the plumbing. The next drop fell with a sound that echoed louder than it should have, a sound that didn't belong to metal or water. It sounded like a footstep, not outside, inside. I backed up slowly, reached for the flare gun still sitting on the table. My hands were shaking now, worse than before. Then the door handle jiggled, just once. Then again. No pounding, no scratching, just the smooth, deliberate sound of someone testing it, the same way you'd test a door when you already knew what was inside. I didn't move. Then, in a voice that chilled every bone in my body, I heard it speak. This time, it wasn't my voice, it was my father's. "Son," it whispered, "let me in, it's cold out here. My father died 10 years ago." I didn't respond, didn't blink, just stood there with the flare gun aimed at the door like it could stop a ghost. That voice, his voice, was flawless, down to the gravel in his throat, the tired affection he always carried at the end of the day, but it wasn't him. Couldn't be. I was frozen in place, one hand trembling so hard I had to grip the other to steady the flare gun. The voice spoke again, this time quieter, sadder. "Open the door, son. I forgive you." Forgive me? The words cut deeper than fear. Because there was a part of me, some small, buried guilt, that wanted to believe he would say that maybe all the things I'd carried after he passed, all the things I never said when I had the chance, maybe this was closure, but the rest of me knew better. This wasn't closure. It was bait. I stepped back, eyes locked on the handle. I watched it twitch gently, slowly, as if whatever was outside wasn't trying to break in, it was trying to make me invite it. "Son." The voice was quieter now, almost ashamed, and then, like something giving up, it fell silent. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I dared to lower the flare gun just a little. Maybe it was gone. I crept to the peephole, keeping my breath shallow, empty. No one there, but something was off. It took me a second to notice what it was. The frost on the window. It was on the inside. I turned slowly, heart crawling up my throat. Every surface in the RV was coated in a thin sheen of moisture, like the whole place had started to sweat cold. The mirror over the sink fogged up even though the air was still, and in the middle of it, a single, long streak appeared. A finger swipe. From the inside, I aimed the flare gun at the mirror. Nothing moved. Then I saw the words start to form in the fog. One slow letter at a time. H-E-L-P, me. I ran. Out the door barefoot, into the freezing night. Didn't even lock it behind me. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe a quarter mile, maybe more. The only thing I could think about was distance. Distance between me and whatever had wormed its way into that RV. I eventually collapsed in the middle of a gravel road, panting, hands scraped from tripping in the dark. My breath came in puffs so cold they stung my lungs. I looked behind me. Still no sound, no footsteps, but I didn't dare go back. I sat there for what felt like hours until the sky started to turn a sickly gray blue. Dawn wasn't hope. It was a clock ticking louder, because morning meant choices. I couldn't stay on that road forever, couldn't survive without supplies, shoes, or food. But going back, it didn't feel like going back to a vehicle anymore. It felt like walking into a mouth, so I waited until full light. Then I did the one thing I told myself I wouldn't do. I went back. I crept through the trees instead of taking the road, kept low, slow, every step a silent prayer that I wouldn't see footprints, mine or otherwise. When I reached the RV, the door was wide open, but everything inside was normal. No fog, no writing, no moisture. I stepped in slowly, flare gun up, ready to fire at anything that so much as creaked. But nothing moved. Even the faucet was dry. It was like it had never happened, except for one thing. On the table, where I'd left the flare gun box, was a Polaroid photo I'd never seen before. It showed the RV from outside, from the woods, from where I'd just come. And in the window, a silhouette, not mine, and not my father's. I didn't touch the photo, didn't even breathe on it. Just stared, trying to make sense of the shadow in the window, its slanted shoulders, its two long arms hanging at its sides. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't me. I knew how I stood, how I moved. This thing, this presence had posture like it was waiting, like it knew the photo would be found. And the worst part? That angle, whoever took it had to have been watching me the night before, from deep in the trees. Close enough to smell the fire, close enough to see the flicker in my eyes when I first heard the voice. My stomach knotted. I scanned the RV again, searching every cabinet, every closet, even under the built-in bench. Still empty. Still silent, but not safe. That word was gone from my vocabulary now. I packed fast, faster than I've ever packed in my life. I didn't care about the trail I left. Didn't care about dishes, towels, or how much fresh water I had in the tank. I needed to move, to get out of this place. The only thing I left behind was the photo, still there, face up, like it was daring me to take it. I started the engine and drove with one hand still shaking on the wheel. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires on frozen dirt and the low drone of my own fear. Hours passed. I didn't stop, not even to eat. It wasn't until I hit the outskirts of a small town, Maple Ridge, population maybe 200, that I finally let myself breathe. I parked near a gas station and just sat for a minute, let the engine idle while I tried to feel human again. But I couldn't shake the sense that I'd brought something with me. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something deeper, primal, like when you smell something rotting before you see it. That ancient part of the brain that screams wrong, wrong, wrong before your thoughts catch up. I got out and filled the tank, trying to act normal. The attendant was an older guy with a full gray beard and the kind of stare that said he didn't miss much. He leaned out the booth as I swiped my card. "You just come down from the forest?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, spent a night up north." His eyes narrowed just a bit. "Saw the frost on your windows. Strange weather for mid-July." I glanced at the RV. Frost. In July. He was right. I hadn't even noticed it still lingered on the side windows like a whisper of the cold that had chased me into the trees. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Strange is one word for it." He paused, watching me, then asked, "You stop near Hollow Creek?" My blood ran cold. How do you know? His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. You should leave. Don't stay the night in Maple Ridge. Keep going. I opened my mouth to ask more, but his booth door slammed shut. Locked. He wouldn't speak again. I didn't stay. I drove 3 more hours, south, toward real heat, toward civilization. Found a KOA on the edge of a bigger town and parked in a well-lit lot with neighbors on all sides. Families, laughter, music. It felt safer, at least for a while. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even grief, rising up in strange ways. But that night, as I lay down to sleep, something tapped on the window by my bed. Not hard, not urgent, just curious, like a raccoon trying to understand glass. I didn't move, didn't turn on a light. I just waited. And eventually, the tapping stopped. But the next morning, there were 4 small prints in the dust on the outside of the window. Not paws. Fingers! I took pictures of the prints, sent them to a friend who's worked in wildlife biology for years, someone I trusted, someone grounded in reality. I didn't explain the full context, just asked, "What do you make of these?" He replied fast, "Those aren't animal. You sure someone didn't mess with your RV?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen, unsure how to respond. Because no, I hadn't told him everything. Not about the voice, not about the photo, not about the gas station attendant who looked at me like I was already halfway gone. But those prints, they weren't large. Maybe the size of a child's hands, but elongated. Each digit slightly off, too narrow, too long, like they'd been stretched somehow. 4 fingers, no thumb, like something mimicking a hand, but not quite getting it right. And the spacing, they weren't flat like a person pressing from outside. The streaks suggested movement. Upward, diagonal, like it had climbed the side of the RV and rested there, peering in, watching. I should have left. I should have packed up and driven straight to the coast, maybe all the way to San Diego where the roads are noisy and the sky never really gets dark. But I didn't. I stayed another night because something inside me wanted to understand. And maybe that was the beginning of the real mistake. That next day, I went to the front desk of the KOA, asked if they had any incidents lately, wildlife, vandalism, break-ins. The woman behind the counter smiled politely but stiffened when I mentioned the handprints. You say they were like a child's? She asked. Sort of, but longer fingers. No thumb. Her smile froze just for a second, like she'd heard that before, but she forced it back, brushed it off. We haven't had any incidents like that, she said, probably just some neighborhood kid messing around. But the way her eyes darted away said otherwise. I walked the campground that afternoon, looked at the layout, counted the lights, noticed how thick the tree line was on one side, like the campground itself was trying to forget what bordered it. That night, I stayed up late, kept the lights off, sat in the captain's chair with a blanket over my lap and a thermos of coffee in my hands, and I waited. Around 1:17 a.m., I heard it again. Not tapping this time. Breathing. Just outside the window behind me. I didn't move, not a twitch, just focused on my own breath, slowing it down, making it quiet enough to hear what was outside. It was shallow, rhythmic, like a person trying not to be heard, but too close to control it completely. The kind of breath you take when you're crouched down, barely moving, barely blinking, just watching. Then the RV shifted, just a little, the smallest creak of suspension, like weight had shifted from one side to another. That was it. I stood, flipped the headlights on, slammed the horn, blaring it into the still night. A few RV doors cracked open. People peeked out. But by the time I rushed outside with a flashlight, there was nothing there. No prints this time, no trails, just silence and the faint smell of sulfur, like a struck match left too long in the air. I didn't sleep after that, didn't even try, just kept staring out into the dark tree line. I left before sunrise, but it didn't leave me. A week passed. I moved almost daily, north, then west, then southeast again. I tried the desert. I tried busy RV parks. I even stayed in a Walmart parking lot for 3 nights in a row just to feel surrounded by security cameras and fluorescent lights. But the prints kept showing up. Not every night, just often enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes on the rear window, sometimes on the roof vent, once impossibly inside the fridge. Not a full hand, just the fog of breath against the white plastic back wall with the same 4 elongated marks trailing down like condensation dragged by fingers. That's when I knew this wasn't just wildlife. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a raccoon or some trick of fog and shadow. This thing, whatever it was, it had followed me. I stopped calling it an animal, stopped trying to categorize it at all. There's a moment when your brain gives up on rationalizing, when logic starts to rot in your hands and something older, more primal, takes its place. I reached that moment around day 15. Somewhere in Utah, I'd parked at a rest stop near a canyon overlook, thinking maybe elevation would make me feel safer. Like if I could see everything around me, I'd be okay. But night has a way of closing in no matter how high you climb. I double-checked every lock, pulled down every blind, slept with a hatchet beside me, and still I woke up with my door unlatched, not flung open, not broken, just unlatched, as if something wanted me to wonder, to question my own memory, and that's what scared me the most. The not knowing, the creeping paranoia that slithered into the cracks of every decision. Did I forget? Did I not check the door after all? Or was it something else, something that could move through seams, that watched me fumble with my own sanity, and enjoyed it? I drove 300 miles the next day without stopping, didn't even eat, just gas station coffee and the sick churn of adrenaline keeping me upright. I tried podcasts, music, even calling my sister just to hear another human voice. But that weird static kept coming through, intermittent, sharp, almost intentional, like it was imitating a connection, not making one. And the dreams started soon after. Every night I'd wake in a cold sweat, my ears ringing. Sometimes I'd remember fragments, branches scraping the roof, something crawling under the RV, muffled voices saying my name over and over in a breathless whisper. But the worst dream, the one that stuck, I was lying in the RV bed, completely still, eyes open, unable to move. Something crouched above me, barely outlined in the dark. It didn't breathe. It didn't shift. It just stayed there, its face inches from mine, head tilted too far to one side, as if curious, as if confused why I wasn't running. And then, slowly, it whispered, "You're still mine." I woke up screaming. The window beside me was open. I hadn't opened it. I never opened that window. That's when I stopped driving aimlessly and started looking for answers. I posted in forums, not the usual RV groups. They'd laugh me off. I dug into the weird corners of the internet. Paranormal camping threads, missing hiker theories, off-grid horror posts. And I found something. Not much, but enough. A string of posts going back years, scattered across message boards like breadcrumbs. Different usernames, different states, but the same tone of desperation, the same descriptions, the same prints. One guy even posted a photo that stopped me cold. Prints smeared across the inside of a fogged-up RV mirror. Identical to mine. He'd captioned it, "It watches through glass, don't let it in." That post was dated 7 years ago, and the account had no further activity. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands felt numb just reading it. Because deep down, I already knew this thing, whatever it was, wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to us, to the ones who saw it, who acknowledged it, and maybe, just maybe, to the ones who tried to run. That night, I parked under a bright bank of lights at a truck stop in Arizona. Cameras everywhere, people nearby. I thought maybe I'd sleep in peace just once, but I woke at 3:12 a.m. to a soft thump, checked every window. Nothing. I sat up, heart hammering, breath shallow. Then I noticed my phone buzzing. No name, just a number. A long one. I answered, thinking maybe it was an emergency. What I heard, breathing, just like before. And then a whisper. "Glass. Glass. You left it cracked." I dropped the phone, rushed to the front window. And sure enough, the driver's side was open just a sliver, wide enough for air, wide enough for breath. I shut it, locked everything, shoved towels into every vent, every crevice. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Couldn't. Every creak felt intentional. Every blink of my headlights reflecting against glass felt like eyes. I thought about fire, about dousing the RV in gasoline and walking away. But I knew deep down it wouldn't matter, because it wasn't the RV. It was me. The fear changes you. It makes you see the world in layers. What's real, what's almost real, and what lives just beyond that thin membrane we pretend isn't there. I stopped thinking of my RV as shelter. It felt more like a display case, a lit-up box with me trapped inside for something to study or stalk. Every morning, I'd inspect everything. Windows, mirrors, seals. I bought motion detectors. I even rigged up noise traps, little tin cans hanging from string at each corner of the exterior, just in case. If one moved, I'd know. And still, they moved. Always when I wasn't looking. One night, I parked in Nevada out near Pyramid Lake. It was quiet, eerie kind of quiet, like the landscape had been muted. I was trying to enjoy the view, trying to pretend I was still just a guy on a solo road trip. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt it. Pressure, not wind, not weather. Something internal, like I was being compressed. The sunset was blood orange, beautiful. But when I blinked just for a second, the lake turned black, no reflection. Just a void. And in that dark water, something moved. I could swear it moved upward. Not a ripple, not a fish. It was like the lake inhaled. I left immediately. Didn't even retract the awning properly. I just gunned it. And that's when the noise started again, but not from outside. Inside. I was on the highway, miles from anything, and I heard it. Something crawling in the walls. Not mice, not bugs. Scraping. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Like something trying to mimic the sound of a heartbeat. I pulled over, popped the side panel, flashlight in hand, and there was nothing. No droppings, no damage. But the wall felt warm. Too warm. I put my palm flat against it, and it felt like something pressed back. I reeled away, slammed it shut. That's when I heard the whisper again. No phone this time, no radio. Just air. Right behind me, it said, "Don't look behind you." And for the first time, I listened. I didn't turn around. I got in the driver's seat and drove, not even knowing where I was headed. I just needed light. People. Some kind of anchor to this reality. That's how I ended up at the RV park in Oregon, north of Crater Lake, a place called Deadman's Hill, some weird local legend about miners and disappearances. I didn't care. They had lights, security cameras, other campers. I pulled in and begged for a spot, cash in hand, eyes wide like some junkie looking for shelter. The guy at the desk didn't even flinch, just handed me a map and said, "Lot 17. That one's been empty a while." I didn't ask why, didn't want to know, but the space was isolated, a good 50 feet from the next nearest camper. Still, I parked, locked everything, and for the first time in a long time, I sat down and cried, quietly. Just let it out. That kind of exhausted, bitter sobbing you can't explain to anyone, because who would believe me? Then I saw movement, a silhouette, far off, just beyond the tree line, a person, or what looked like a person. They were just standing there, motionless, facing me. No flashlight, no phone glow, just a dark outline against the deeper dark of the woods. I stared back, didn't blink, didn't breathe, until I realized I couldn't see their legs. They weren't standing. They were hanging, feet not touching the ground, swaying just slightly. I closed the blinds, sat on the floor with my hatchet, clutching it like it could save me from whatever rules the forest had broken. I didn't sleep, not even a second. And in the morning, the spot where the figure had been, empty. No rope, no footprints, nothing disturbed. But on my RV's windshield was a smudge, a long vertical smear, like a face had been pressed there in the night. And it wasn't condensation. It was from the inside. I didn't move for hours. I just sat there, staring at that smudge on the inside of the glass. It had a shape, forehead, cheekbone, nose. Like someone had leaned in, watched me, breathed against the windshield while I was curled up on the floor trying to forget the hanging figure. The worst part? There were fingerprints too, right where the eyes should have been. Not normal ones. They were too long, thin, like each finger had one too many joints. Smudged slightly, like whoever, or whatever it was, had dragged its fingers down the glass as it slipped out of view. I didn't open the door that day. Didn't go outside. I didn't even eat. I just watched, listened, sat in my RV like it was a bunker. And sometime around dusk, the silence broke. A knock. Not on the door, not on the walls. Underneath, a single solid knock from beneath the RV, like something was under the frame. I froze. Then another knock, slower, like it was waiting for my heartbeat to spike again before responding. I reached for my phone, no bars. I reached for the radio, dead. No wind, no birds, no footsteps from nearby camps, just me. The knocks and the long breath of dread rising in my throat. Eventually, I slid from the couch to the floor, laid flat on my stomach, and pressed my ear to the vinyl. Nothing. Then, a whisper. So faint, I thought I imagined it. "Do you remember what you did?" I jerked up, slammed the cabinet shut where I kept the tools. My hands shook as I pulled out the jack and the long flashlight, opened the side door just enough to slip out, slammed it behind me, and dropped to the gravel. I crouched there, listening. Nothing moved, not the trees, not the wind, not even the insects. It was too quiet. I crawled to the rear of the RV and knelt beside the frame, flashlight ready. I aimed the beam underneath and stopped breathing. Carved into the gravel below the RV, like with a stick or a finger dragged through wet dust, was a message. 4 words. "You were here before." I backed up, fast, slammed into the side of the RV. My own breath was ragged and loud, but I couldn't stop looking at it. The message was fresh. The dirt was disturbed. No tire tracks or boot prints around it. Just the words. Just that. I slept in the driver's seat that night. Engine idling. Hatchet on my lap. I left the park the moment there was enough daylight to make it look like I wasn't running away. But I was. And I drove. Hours turned to days. I didn't stop unless I absolutely had to. Walmart parking lots, gas stations, any place that felt bright, open, soulless. But the more I ran, the more I started to question it all. Did I actually hear whispers? See that hanging figure? Could it all have been stress? Sleep deprivation? The brain's way of screaming when no one else will listen? I told myself maybe I imagined it. Until 2 weeks later in Arizona, I was on the outskirts of Flagstaff. Thought I'd get a quick rest before hitting Sedona. There was a small camping area tucked into the pines, private, free, remote. I parked, made a fire, tried to feel normal again. And that's when I saw the coyote. It limped out of the brush like it was sick, starving, fur patchy, eyes dull. I stood, instinct telling me to keep distance, but it didn't come closer. It sat, stared, didn't blink, didn't twitch, just sat there watching. After maybe 5 minutes, it cocked its head, like a person would. Then it made a sound, and that's when everything in me froze. It didn't bark, didn't howl, it whispered, same cadence, same voice. "You were here before." I threw the fire poker. The coyote didn't flinch. It blinked once, then stood and backed away. Not turned, not ran. Backed away, slow and deliberate, without breaking eye contact. Then it vanished into the woods. That was the moment I stopped pretending it wasn't real. Whatever this was, this thing, it wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to me. I packed up that night like the trees were about to fall on me. Fire still smoldering, pot of water still warm. I didn't care. I left it all behind and drove the headlights cutting through miles of black trees and empty roads. Didn't even plug in a destination. I just needed to move. Somewhere deep down, I thought maybe it was still that campground in Montana. Maybe something there latched on, a spirit, a curse, a guilt I hadn't faced yet. But whatever it was, I felt it traveling with me now, just beyond the reach of the mirrors. I tried to call my sister in Nevada, no signal. Tried to use my phone to record what happened, but when I played it back, it was just static, and sometimes whispers layered under the hiss. Not words I could make out, just breath. That's when I knew, whatever this thing was, it didn't want to be documented. It wanted to be felt, to be feared. A week later, I was desperate for sleep, so I pulled into a small RV park outside Zion. It was still early, just after sunset, but already I had that sinking sensation again, that heavy pressure in my chest like something wasn't right. The attendant was gone. The office was dark, but the gate was open, and a sign said, "Check in tomorrow." So I pulled into a space near the edge of the lot, figuring I'd leave by morning. That night, I locked up everything. Covered the windows, double-checked every latch. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard something scratching. At first, I thought it was a tree branch. Wind, maybe, but it wasn't random. It was steady, rhythmic, like claws. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Against the side paneling of the RV, I held my breath and waited, tried not to move. Then it stopped. I exhaled slowly, too soon. Something tapped the glass. Not on the door, on the rear window, the one I had blacked out with a shade. I didn't go look, but I heard it, right on the other side of that curtain. It started with a single tap, then another, then a slow, long drag of a finger across the window. I could hear the squeak, the moisture of skin against glass, then a whisper, clear as if it was spoken beside my ear. You left it behind. I didn't sleep, didn't move, just sat in that RV all night until the sun cracked the horizon and whatever was outside finally left, if it ever did. That morning I checked the window. No prints, no scratches, just a smear, a long one, like something wet had been pressed against it. I left that RV park before anyone else was awake, and I started to realize this wasn't just haunting me physically. It was eroding my mind, because with each new encounter, each new whisper, it wasn't just the fear that grew. It was the questions. What had I left behind? What did it mean? You were here before. Was it metaphorical? Was it literal? Was it something from this life or another? And worst of all, was it trying to remind me of something I'd repressed? Those thoughts ate away at me as I drove for days through Arizona, then New Mexico. Desert highways that felt endless. The kind of terrain where even your own thoughts echo back at you louder than they should. By the time I reached the outskirts of White Sands, I was hallucinating shadows. Every telephone pole was a figure. Every dust devil in the distance looked like someone walking toward me. I parked off a remote road near an abandoned trailhead just to sleep for an hour. Just 1 hour. I laid down in the back, exhausted. And when I woke up, the desert outside my window wasn't empty anymore. There were footprints, hundreds of them, surrounding the RV in a perfect circle, barefoot, some small like a child's, others huge like they belonged to something not quite human. And carved into the sand near the passenger door, using what looked like claw marks, were those same words again. You were here before. I backed out of that spot like the ground itself was about to give way. Tires spinning in sand, heart punching through my ribs. I didn't stop to look back. I couldn't, because whatever had been there while I slept, it had stood around me, watched me, surrounded me like a ritual circle drawn in dust and silence, and I had slept through it. The rest of that day was a blur of empty roads and second-guessing. I started to question my sanity. Maybe it was heat stroke. Maybe I was unraveling from lack of sleep and too much time alone on the road. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just psychological. This was spiritual. Something had taken interest in me. Something patient, cunning, and hungry. I told myself I'd head north, away from the desert. That maybe elevation, cooler air, trees, anything else would break this spell, that I just needed to get out of the sun, off the sand, and away from these remote places that seemed to amplify whatever was following me. So I found myself on a 2-lane forest road climbing into Colorado, somewhere between Pagosa Springs and nowhere in particular. That's where I saw the sign. Simple plywood, spray-painted black letters. Primitive wildlife area, camp at own risk. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. But that's the thing about fear. It wears you down. And when you're worn down long enough, you start confusing survival with surrender. I pulled in. No marked spots, just open woods, tall ponderosa pines, and a trail so overgrown it looked like no one had used it in years. Still, I found a semi-level spot, parked the RV, and killed the engine. It was the first time in a week I felt something like peace. Cool shade, bird song, no cell signal, but I welcomed it for once. I wanted the silence. I even convinced myself it would be okay. That maybe I was finally ahead of it. That whatever this thing was, it had stayed behind in the desert. But peace, I've learned, is the scariest part of any horror story, because it's never the end. It's the bait. I built a small fire, ate a cold can of chili with a spoon, sat in my camp chair with the fading blue sky above, and thought, maybe I'd made it through. Then, just as the last light left the trees, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in days. An animal call. But it wasn't right. It started like a coyote yip, but dragged on, became something higher, sharper, almost like a baby crying in reverse. It echoed through the woods once, then again, then closer. I stood up. The chair creaked loud enough to betray how tense I was. The fire popped once, loud, and I jumped. Then the call came again, maybe 20 feet away now, and this time it wasn't just a sound. It was a voice trying to sound like a coyote, like someone mimicking the woods but getting the pitch wrong, too slow, too human. I grabbed the flashlight and scanned the trees. Nothing. But the moment I turned it off, I heard it again, closer. Now it was pacing, right outside the ring of light cast by the fire. One step, then another, then breathing, labored, wet, like something with lungs too big for its body. Then it spoke. Not a call, not an imitation, but actual words. Low, ragged, scraping across the bark like claws. You brought it here. I froze. It was the same voice I'd heard in Zion, the same one from the whisper at the window. But now it wasn't behind glass. It was in the woods, 10 feet from me. You brought it here. That's when I realized it wasn't just one thing. There were two. The thing that was haunting me, and the thing I had led it to. Whatever followed me from Montana had been chasing something else, and now I'd become the bridge. I backed slowly toward the RV, flashlight trembling in my hand. Didn't dare run, didn't dare speak. But then the fire blew out, not sputtered, blew out. Like someone exhaled on it, and in that darkness, true, perfect black, I saw them. Two eyes, far too high up to be human, and wide, reflecting the flashlight like wet marbles. I turned, I ran, slammed the RV door and locked it so hard the frame bent, didn't even turn the engine. I just laid there on the floor, shaking, staring at the door, waiting for it to knock. But it never did. Instead, I heard the voice again. Not outside, inside, right above my head. You brought it here. I shot up, smacking my head on the underside of the kitchenette counter. My breath caught halfway out of my throat. Nothing. Silence. No more voice. No footsteps on the roof. No shifting weight. Just the still hum of my RV's refrigerator and the pounding of my heartbeat echoing in the claustrophobic quiet. But that didn't mean it was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud, afraid to check. Eventually, as the faint gray light of dawn filtered through the cracked blinds, I worked up the nerve to unlock the door. I cracked it an inch, then two. Still no sound, still no sign, just the ordinary quiet of early morning forest. I stepped out. The fire pit was cold, the ashes scattered like something had dragged its hand through them. And then I saw the footprints, not boots, not paws, bare, human-shaped, but wrong. The proportions were stretched, toes too long, the arch too deep, as if the foot had bent backward like an animal's hind leg. There were dozens of them. Circling the RV, one set of prints had climbed onto the hood, walked along the roof, and stopped directly above where my head had lain inside. I nearly collapsed. I needed out. Now. I didn't bother packing anything up. Left the chair, the utensils, even the little lantern I always hung near the door. Just threw it in drive and tore out of there like my life depended on it. Because I believed, truly believed it did. But when I reached the edge of the forest road, I found something waiting. A ranger truck, parked sideways, blocking the only exit. An older man in uniform stood beside it, arms crossed, no expression on his face. I slowed down and rolled my window down halfway. My hand was still shaking. "Something happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He didn't answer right away, just looked past me at the RV, at the roof, then at me. "You camped up there last night?" he asked finally, tilting his head toward the forest. I nodded. He scratched his beard and exhaled through his nose. "You shouldn't have." "Believe me," I said. "I know that now." Then he said something that chilled me deeper than anything I'd seen or heard out there. "You're not the first," he muttered, "but you might be the last." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer. "There's been something in those woods. People hear things, see lights, smell burning hair. We tried closing off the area years ago, but hikers keep going back in, and sometimes they don't come back out. My mouth went dry. I wanted to ask what it was, but he beat me to it. Thing is, we always assumed it was one creature, some rogue predator, a mutated bear maybe, a mountain lion with mange. But I think, he trailed off, looking at the forest like it was listening. I think there's more than one now. I swallowed hard. You think it's multiplying? No, he said. I think people are bringing it with them. And once it tastes them, once it learns their voice, their fear, it doesn't stop. He gave me one last look, like a silent warning, then stepped back to his truck. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned down the road and didn't stop until I crossed into Kansas. But even then, safe, parked in a full campground with kids riding bikes and dads grilling burgers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Because fear like that, it doesn't just go away. It settles into your bones. It becomes part of your nervous system, a second heartbeat. And every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That voice, that whisper. You brought it here. That's when it hit me. That ranger had looked at me like I was the danger. Like maybe it wasn't just following me. Maybe it had merged with me, clung to me like smoke on skin, feeding off me, using my life, my memories, my guilt like tinder, because I'd made a mistake. A simple one we all make. I thought the danger was out there, but in reality, I'd let it in. It's been 3 months since that night. 3 months since I fled the forest with tire tracks still fresh in bloodied soil. Since I heard that voice whispering from the trees, or from my own fractured thoughts. I tried to go back to normal, truly. Took my RV to open plains and quiet lakefronts. Kept my trips to populated areas, full campgrounds, well-lit KOAs, busy parks with plenty of foot traffic. I smiled at other campers, waved at rangers, grilled hot dogs by the fire like the whole thing was just some story I imagined too vividly. But the truth is, I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night since. Because the voice still comes, soft, familiar, patient. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. It whispers through the cracks in my RV windows, sometimes through the floorboards, sometimes from the vents. And it always sounds like someone I know. The woman I dated 5 years ago, who vanished during a solo hiking trip in Arizona. My dad, who passed away in his sleep when I was 17. Even myself, pleading, crying, laughing. Especially myself. It doesn't attack me, doesn't knock anymore, doesn't need to. It knows I'm listening. It knows it owns me now. And I've started to understand something more terrifying than I thought possible. It was never a creature in the woods. It's not even a thing with a body or a shape. It's a phenomenon. It's what happens when fear learns your name. I think that's why it's spreading. Why the ranger said it's not just one anymore. People go into these remote places, open themselves up to the silence, to the dark, and if you've got even a sliver of unresolved fear inside you, it finds it. And then it becomes that fear. It speaks in it, lives in it, thrives in it. I think that's why campers vanish without a trace. Why they find empty RVs with food still hot on the stove. Why the fire's still crackling and the dog's still barking and the only thing missing is the person who was afraid. Because this thing doesn't just kill you, it absorbs you. And every time you remember it, every time you tell someone else about it, you give it more shape, more voice, more power. Which is why until now, I never planned to share this. But I think that's how it wins, by keeping us afraid and silent. By feeding off shame and doubt and that little voice inside that says, you're just being dramatic, no one would believe you anyway. I'm done being silent. Because the only thing more dangerous than telling this story is not telling it. So if you're heading out on your next RV trip, whether it's a lonely overlook in the Rockies or a packed beach in Florida, listen to me. I'm not saying don't go. I still believe in the beauty of the road, of freedom, of unplugging. But when you hear that voice in the night, one that sounds like someone you love, someone you lost, or even yourself, don't open the door. Don't listen too closely. Don't answer it. Because it wants you to. And once it learns your voice, you'll never hear silence again. That's all I've got. Take care of yourselves out there. Don't camp with unresolved fear. Don't assume the danger's out there in the wild. Sometimes the wild follows you home, and sometimes it whispers your name from just behind the glass. Sleep light and keep your fire burning. Always.